My mother took my bridal bouquet out of my hands so fast that for one stupid second, I thought she was trying to save it from falling. Her fingers closed around the silk-wrapped stems, she twisted her wrist, and suddenly the flowers Elena had spent weeks designing with me were no longer mine. Mom turned and pushed them into my younger sister Kelsey's arms. "Hold these," she said, almost cheerfully. Kelsey caught the bouquet against her chest. I stared at her. Then at my mother. "Put it down." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Kelsey's eyes flicked toward Mom instead of me, and that was when I knew this wasn't some impulsive little stunt. Before Kelsey could answer, Elena stepped away from the floral installation beside the dance floor. "Ma'am, that was made for the bride." My father barely looked at her. He lifted one hand as if he were waving away a server who had interrupted dinner. "They're just flowers." Elena went completely still. Then she reached for her phone. What happened over the next 30 seconds changed the way I understood my family. And if you've ever had someone dismiss your boundaries because they thought you were strong enough to take it, stay with me, tell me how you're doing in the comments, and subscribe to the channel because the bouquet was only the first thing I learned they had planned. Elena looked at me once before she did anything else. We had been friends for years, though my parents didn't know that. To them, she was simply the florist I had hired for the wedding. I had never asked for a discount, never introduced her as my friend during planning meetings, and never blurred the line between what she was doing professionally and what our friendship meant privately. So when she stepped toward the wireless microphone resting on the stand near the DJ table, Mom looked annoyed rather than worried. Elena unlocked her phone, found a video, and held the speaker close to the live microphone. There was a rustle of movement, the faint scrape of something on a work table, and then my mother's voice came through the reception, speakers clearly enough to stop conversations at the tables nearest us. "Once she has it, don't let the bride take it back." A few people turned toward me. Then Dad's voice followed, lower but still unmistakable. "And if Claire gets angry," Mom answered, "she won't ruin her own wedding over a bouquet." There was a pause. Dad said, "She'll get over it." I felt the first physical reaction before I had a complete thought. My fingers went cold. My shoulders locked. Somewhere behind me, a fork hit a plate with a small metallic clatter that sounded absurdly loud in the sudden silence. Mom's face changed before the clip even finished. She lunged toward Elena's phone, but Elena stepped back, keeping it beside the microphone until the last second of audio played. By then, the room had already heard enough. Mom spun toward me. "Claire, this is being taken completely out of context." Dad looked at Elena as if she had committed the offense. Kelsey was still holding my bouquet. That detail mattered more to me than anything they were saying. She had heard the recording too, and she still hadn't put the flowers down. I was angry enough to feel heat behind my eyes, but I also understood something simple. If I started screaming, my parents would turn the screaming into the story. If I grabbed the bouquet from Kelsey, someone would remember the tug-of-war instead of why it happened. If Evan stepped in and handled them for me, they would later say my husband had escalated everything. So I did the one thing they had apparently counted on me not doing. I stopped worrying about whether my response would make anyone uncomfortable. I looked at Kelsey and said, "Give me my bouquet." She opened her mouth. "Claire, Mom just wanted—" I held out my hand. I didn't ask what Mom wanted. Kelsey stared at me for another second, then handed it back. The flowers were slightly crushed where she had clutched them against her dress. I smoothed one pale garden rose with my thumb and turned toward the young woman holding a phone on a stabilizer near the edge of the dance floor. Her name was Jenna Pierce. Mom had hired her as a wedding gift, supposedly to capture casual vertical videos and family moments that our photographer, Marcus, wouldn't have time to get. I had agreed because it seemed harmless, provided she stayed out of the professional team's way and didn't stage anything involving Evan or me without asking. Now Jenna had her camera pointed directly toward us. "Stop recording," I said. She lowered it immediately. Then I caught the attention of our coordinator and said, "From now on, no photo or video requests from my family go through unless Evan or I approve them first." She nodded without asking questions. Mom took a step toward me. "You are making this so much bigger than it is." I remember looking at her and thinking how strange that sentence sounded when she was the one who had apparently discussed my bouquet in advance like it was an item in a plan. "I'm not making anything bigger," I said. "I'm stopping it." Dad tried the voice he had used on me since I was a teenager, calm and mildly disappointed, the voice that implied everyone would be happier if I simply behaved more reasonably than the person hurting me. "Claire, people are staring." I glanced around the reception. He was right. They were. "Then maybe you shouldn't have done this in front of them." He had no answer for that. Evan came to my side, but he didn't take over. That was one of the reasons I married him. He didn't confuse loving me with speaking for me. He leaned close enough that only I could hear and asked, "Do you want them gone?" I looked at Mom, Dad, and Kelsey. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately. I wanted security to walk them out while every guest watched. But I also knew what that would do. The rest of our reception would become the story of the family being removed instead of the story of the marriage we had just celebrated. "Not yet," I told him. "I'm not giving them the rest of the night too." Evan nodded once. There was no argument, no wounded pride because I hadn't chosen the most dramatic response. I turned to our coordinator. "Dinner continues. Music continues. Nothing changes unless I say so." Then I looked at Mom. "Sit down or leave. Those are your options." Her mouth tightened. Dad put a hand on her arm. Kelsey looked embarrassed for the first time since the bouquet had left my hands. Mom finally walked back toward the family table. Dad followed. Kelsey hesitated, eyes moving from me to Elena. "I didn't know she had that recording," she whispered. It was such a strange choice of words that I noticed it immediately. Not I didn't know Mom planned this. Not I didn't know they were going to take your bouquet. She said she didn't know Elena had recorded them. Before I could ask what she meant, Dad called her name from the table. Kelsey walked away. That sentence stayed in my head through dinner. I did not spend the rest of my wedding glaring at my family. I danced with Evan. I talked to friends who had flown in from other states. I ate part of the dinner I had spent months choosing. I laughed when one of Evan's cousins told a story that had nothing to do with my parents. I refused to give them the satisfaction of turning my wedding into a 3-hour confrontation. But awareness had changed the room. Every time I saw Jenna's phone lowered at her side, I wondered what she had been filming before I told her to stop. Every time Kelsey stood near one of the floral installations, I wondered whether the bouquet had simply been the most visible part of something else. Elena found me near the bar about 20 minutes later. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I was going to tell you after the reception." I didn't blame her. I could tell from her face that she expected me to ask why she had waited, so I saved her from having to defend herself. "You didn't know what they meant." She shook her head. Earlier that afternoon, she explained, she had been working in the shared floral preparation area with her phone already recording a time-lapse of the setup. My parents had walked into the same workspace and started talking a few feet from her. They saw her there. They simply didn't care. They thought she was a vendor, focused on her own work. Elena had heard Mom say that once she had the bouquet, they shouldn't let the bride take it back. She knew it sounded wrong, but she didn't know who she was or what they were trying to accomplish. When she checked the video afterward, she realized the ambient audio had captured the exchange. "I thought I'd give you the raw file tonight," Elena said. "I wasn't going to walk into your bridal suite before the ceremony and tell you I overheard something I couldn't explain." I understood. If she had told me then, I would have spent the entire ceremony trying to decode one sentence. She hadn't protected my mother. She had protected me from a suspicion without context. What changed everything for her was watching Mom physically take the bouquet and put it in Kelsey's hands. The second she did it, Elena said, I knew exactly what I had heard. I squeezed her hand. "Send me the original. Don't edit anything." She nodded. That was the first deliberate evidence decision I made, though I didn't think of it in those terms yet. Mom avoided me for almost an hour after that. Dad tried twice to catch my eye from across the room, and both times I looked away. Kelsey became unusually interested in her phone. If I had been the version of myself my parents expected, I might have gone over to them before dessert and tried to smooth things out. That had been my role for years. Kelsey would do something emotional. Mom would defend her. Dad would say everyone needed to calm down. And somehow I would become responsible for ending the discomfort. I had never thought of that as weakness. I still don't. I usually considered it efficiency. I had a career, responsibilities, a home, and a life I liked. I did not want to spend 3 days arguing over every rude comment or unfair favor. My mistake was believing other people understood my decision not to fight as maturity. My parents had apparently understood it as permission. I had heard variations of the same reasoning for years. Kelsey needed more encouragement because she was more sensitive. Kelsey needed help finding internships because I was better at interviews. Kelsey needed Mom to attend some event because I was so independent. If a family plan inconvenienced one of us, the assumption was often that I would adapt because I could. I had rarely considered those moments serious enough to catalog. That night, for the first time, Dad's recorded words gave all of them a shape. She'll get over it. It wasn't an apology waiting to happen. It was part of the plan. Near the end of dinner, Jenna approached me carefully. She had stopped filming when I told her to, and had not restarted. "Claire, can I talk to you somewhere private?" she asked. I glanced at Evan, and he came with me without being invited because he could tell from Jenna's expression this wasn't about a cute video she wanted us to approve. We moved into a small side corridor between the reception room and the coat area. Jenna held her phone against her chest. "I need to be clear about something," she said. "Your mother hired me, not you." "I thought you knew what she wanted me to capture." "I knew she hired you," I said. "She told me you were here for family clips." Jenna looked uncomfortable. "That's not all she told me." Evan's jaw tightened beside me. I asked the question before he could. "What did she tell you?" Jenna explained that Marilyn had booked her several weeks earlier and described the job as a mixture of family social coverage and content, focused on Kelsey's work in wedding styling. Jenna believed Kelsey had helped with the creative direction, not because Kelsey had told her personally, because Marilyn had said so in the booking notes. There were shots Jenna had been specifically asked to capture. Kelsey near the floral arch, Kelsey adjusting table details, Kelsey standing beside the cake display, Kelsey looking over the sweetheart table. Jenna said she hadn't thought much of it, because people often hired content creators to capture behind-the-scenes work. Then she said, "There was one shot your mother cared about more than the others." I already knew the answer before she said it. The bouquet. My fingers tightened around the stems I was still holding. Jenna unlocked her phone and scrolled through a document. It says, "Clean hero shot, Kelsey with bridal bouquet." She paused. "And there are instructions for some shots without you in the frame." Evan looked at me. I didn't look back. I was trying to understand what I was hearing without jumping ahead of the facts. Why would Kelsey need clean shots of my wedding without me? "I thought it was for her portfolio," Jenna said. The word landed harder than I expected. Her portfolio? Jenna's face changed when she realized I genuinely had no idea. "I was told Kelsey was part of the design team." "No," I said. "She was a guest." Jenna stared at me. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then she looked down at the phone again, and something about her expression shifted from embarrassment to concern. "There's more than the shot list," she said. "Your mother sent me a storyboard and some email notes when she booked me." I didn't pay much attention to the family conversation because I thought everyone had already agreed on the project. "What project?" Evan asked. Jenna turned the screen toward me, but I stopped her before she could start scrolling. I wanted the documents exactly as she had received them, not summarized while I was exhausted and angry. "Don't delete anything," I said. "Don't forward it to anyone else yet. Just send me the booking brief, the contract, and every attachment my mother sent you." Jenna nodded. "I will." I looked through the glass doors toward the reception. Mom was laughing at something an aunt had said. Dad had his hand around a coffee cup. Kelsey was sitting with 2 cousins, her expression carefully neutral. They looked like a normal family finishing a wedding dinner. If Elena had not still been there, that was probably the version of the night they expected to survive. My phone vibrated in my hand as Jenna's first files arrived. The attachment at the bottom had a title I had never seen before: Bennett's Signature Wedding Portfolio Storyboard. And that was when I understood that my mother hadn't taken my bouquet because she thought Kelsey deserved the flowers more. She had taken it because somebody needed the picture. The first time Kelsey asked to use my wedding for her business, there was nothing dramatic about it. We were sitting at my kitchen table in early January, a little more than 3 months before the wedding, with coffee going cold between us and a stack of vendor notes spread across the table. Evan was in the den taking a work call. Kelsey had stopped by because she said she wanted to see the invitation samples, and at first, that was exactly what we talked about. She had always had a good eye. Even when we were younger, she could walk into a room and notice the one lamp that made everything else look wrong. That instinct was part of why I had wanted her business to work. I did not think she was talentless. I thought she was impatient, and at the time I believed impatience was something experience would eventually correct. My wedding was not extravagant by the standards of the industry Kelsey was trying to enter, but it was ours. Evan and I had spent more than a year saving for it. We had chosen a restored glasshouse venue outside Richmond with a garden ceremony, an indoor reception space, and an indoor backup in case April weather turned against us. We were expecting about 110 guests. I had a career I had worked hard for. Evan had his own stable income, and neither of us wanted to begin our marriage by handing my parents financial leverage over the day. So we paid for it ourselves. That mattered more later than I understood then. Elena was doing the flowers. She and I had known each other since college, long before she opened her studio, but I had hired her the same way I would have hired any professional. We signed a contract. I paid her rates. She sent proposals and revisions. In front of my family, I called her my florist because that was what she was there to be. My parents knew I liked her work. They did not know we had spent years celebrating birthdays together, helping each other move apartments, or sitting in hospital waiting rooms when life got ugly. I never saw a reason to explain that. I also never imagined their ignorance would matter. The bouquet itself had taken 3 consultations. Not because it was expensive or elaborate, but because I wanted it to feel like mine. Elena had suggested pale garden roses, ranunculus, sweet peas, a little trailing greenery, and a few smaller seasonal flowers that would soften the shape without making it look overworked. No heirloom brooch, no secret note, no family ribbon, nothing symbolic enough to become a story on its own. That was part of why I loved it. For once, something did not have to represent who my mother thought I should be, who Kelsey needed me to be, or what our family would think looked appropriate in photographs. It was simply something I chose because I liked it. Kelsey was flipping through a printed floral mock-up when she said, "This is going to photograph really well." "I hope so," I said. She kept looking at the page. "Would you mind if I got a few portfolio shots while everything's set up?" I remember putting my coffee down because the request was not entirely surprising. Kelsey had started Kelsey Bennett Events the year before. She had done birthday dinners, a bridal shower, 2 small backyard weddings, and a corporate holiday party where most of the work had been rentals and day of coordination. She was trying to move into full-service wedding styling, which meant she needed better photographs and bigger projects behind her name. "What kind of shots?" I asked. "Nothing invasive. Just me with some of the finished details. Maybe by the arch. Maybe holding the bouquet for 1 or 2. Some tables before guests come in." I looked at her. "For your business?" "Yeah. You didn't design any of those things." Her expression tightened immediately. "I know that. I'm not saying I did." "Then what would the pictures be showing?" She pushed the mock-up back toward me. "My eye. My aesthetic. The kind of work I want to do." That answer told me everything I needed. I did not want to spend my wedding wondering whether a family photograph was actually content for somebody else's business. I did not want Elena's work, our planner's work, or my own months of decisions becoming visual shorthand for experience Kelsey did not have. So I said no. I did not insult her. I did not tell her she was a fraud. I did not lecture her about earning her way. I said, You can come as my sister. My wedding isn't a styled shoot for your business. She leaned back in her chair. I'm asking for a few pictures, Claire, and I'm saying no. You won't even be in most of them. That's part of the problem. She looked toward the den as if Evan might somehow make me more reasonable. I'm not trying to steal your wedding. I didn't say you were. You're acting like it. I'm acting like I want the people who did the work to be the ones credited for the work. That was the moment her face changed. Not into anger exactly. More like embarrassment covered quickly by annoyance. Kelsey had always hated feeling inexperienced. She could tolerate being told she had made a mistake. What she hated was being reminded that somebody else knew more than she did. She gathered her phone and stood. Fine, forget I asked. I let her leave without chasing her. That was one of the things my family never seemed to understand about me. I could say no without needing the other person to agree that my no was fair. I did not need Kelsey to leave my house happy. I did not need Mom to validate every boundary. I thought that meant I was good at protecting myself. Looking back, I was only good at stating the boundary. I was much less consistent about what happened when somebody ignored it. Mom called the next evening. Kelsey says you embarrassed her. I told her she couldn't use my wedding as business content. She asked for a handful of photographs. She asked to use work she didn't do to promote work she wants people to think she can do. Mom sighed. That is such an uncharitable way to put it. It's an accurate way. You already have a career, Claire. You're established. She's trying to build something. That sentence was familiar enough that I almost laughed. Mom had been using different versions of it since we were young. Claire already knows how to study. Kelsey needs more help. Claire already has friends. Kelsey needs someone to include her. Claire is independent. Kelsey needs more attention. My mother could turn my competence into evidence that I required less of everything. My career isn't relevant, I said. It is relevant. You know how hard it is to get started. Yes. Which is why she should get started with work she actually does. You make everything so black and white. No, this one just is. Mom went quiet for a moment, then changed tactics. What would it hurt you? There it was. The argument that had worked on me more times than I wanted to admit. Not because I was weak, but because it appealed to my sense of efficiency. If something cost me almost nothing and prevented 3 days of family drama, I often decided it was easier to let it go. This time I did not. It would make me spend my wedding monitoring what Kelsey is doing with it, I said. I don't want that, she asked. I answered. Mom's voice cooled. You could be more supportive. I can support her without giving her my wedding. You always say things like that, because they keep being true. She hung up before I did. 2 days later, Dad tried. He was always subtler than Mom. She pushed. He negotiated. She accused. He made whatever she wanted sound like the reasonable path between two extreme positions, even when one of those positions belonged entirely to her. He called while I was leaving work. Your mother is upset. I know. And Kelsey's hurt. I know that too. You know how much this means to your mother. I stopped beside my car. Why does Kelsey using my wedding for her business mean so much to Mom? She wants to see both of you doing well. I am doing well. That's not what I meant. No, but that's the problem. My doing well is always the reason I'm supposed to give something up. Dad exhaled. Nobody is asking you to give anything up. She asked for my bouquet, my venue setup, my vendor's work, and my wedding photographs to make her portfolio look stronger. She asked to hold some flowers for a picture. I remember closing my eyes for a second. My father could shrink almost any problem if making it smaller meant he would not have to take a side. It's my wedding, I said. That has to mean something too. Of course it does. Then why are we still discussing this after I said no? He did not answer directly. Sometimes being the bigger person means recognizing when something matters more to someone else. That phrase had followed me for most of my life. Be the bigger person. It sounded noble, until I realized it was almost never said to the person creating the problem. I'm not going to be the bigger person with something that belongs to me, I said. He went quiet. Then he said, I hope you don't regret making this harder than it needs to be. I did not regret saying no. What I regretted later was assuming that, because both of them had heard me, the discussion was over. A few weeks passed without another argument. Mom became pleasant again. Kelsey sent me a link to shoes she thought would work with my rehearsal dinner dress. Dad asked whether we needed help transporting anything to the venue. The pressure disappeared so completely that I thought, incorrectly, that the matter had burned itself out. Then Mom offered to hire Jenna. She brought it up over dinner in early March, about 6 weeks before the wedding. "You have Marcus for the formal photography," she said, "but everyone says couples barely see half the little moments until afterward. I found someone who does those quick phone videos, vertical clips, family reactions, things like that." I knew what she meant. Wedding content creators had become common enough that several coworkers had hired them. They were not replacing photographers. They were usually there to capture fast behind-the-scenes footage that could be shared quickly. "I don't really need that," I said. "It would be my gift." That made me hesitate, not because I wanted Mom paying for part of the wedding, but because the service was separate enough that I did not see an obvious downside. What exactly would she do? Candid things, people arriving, your bridesmaids, little family clips, maybe some detail shots while Marcus is busy with you and Evan? I looked at Evan. He shrugged. As long as she stays out of Marcus's way. That became my rule. I told Mom I was fine with Jenna coming if she followed the coordinator's instructions, did not interfere with our hired vendors, and did not stage anything involving Evan or me unless we approved it first. "No problem," Mom said immediately. The speed of that answer should have bothered me more. Jenna's standard paperwork went through the coordinator, because every vendor or outside professional entering the venue had to be accounted for. I did not sit down and read her contract line by line. At the time. Why would I? She was my mother's gift, not a service I had selected. I knew the scope was described as personal and family social content. I knew the coordinator had her contact information. I knew she was supposed to stay secondary to Marcus. That was enough for me then. After the wedding, Jenna showed me the terms properly. She retained her raw footage and copyright. Mom's package allowed personal and family social use. It did not give Mom the right to hand the footage to someone else's business for commercial promotion. And Kelsey Bennett Events had never received a commercial license. But none of that meant anything to me in March because I did not know there was anything to protect myself from. The next piece of the story did not become mine until the morning after the wedding. I want to be precise about that because I was not in the floral preparation area when my parents had the conversation Elena recorded. Everything I know about that moment comes from the raw clip Elena sent me and what she told me when we sat down the next morning. I watched the original file more than once. There was no dramatic hidden camera angle, no whispered conspiracy in a locked room. That would have been easier to dismiss as something Elena had gone looking for. The truth was almost more insulting. Elena had been working in a shared prep space at the venue. Her phone was already recording a time-lapse of her work. Buckets of flowers were lined against one wall. Ribbon, cutters, spare stems, water tubes, and packing materials were spread across the tables. Staff moved in and out of nearby spaces. Elena was plainly there. My parents saw her. They just did not think she mattered. They did not know she was my friend. To them, she was a florist with her head down over a work table. In the raw video, Mom and Dad came into the edge of the workspace. The image did not even center them. Most of the frame showed flowers and Elena's hands. Their voices were simply part of the ambient sound. Mom said, "Once she has it, don't let the bride take it back." Dad's voice came next. "And if Claire gets angry, she won't ruin her own wedding over a bouquet." There was a pause in the clip. Elena kept working. Then Dad said, "She'll get over it." When Elena heard it in real time, she knew enough to be uneasy, but not enough to know what they were planning. She could have meant anyone. The bouquet could have been part of a surprise photograph. The phrase sounded wrong, but Elena had one incomplete conversation and a bride who was about to get married. She decided she would finish her work, keep the raw file, and talk to me privately after the reception instead of throwing a suspicion into the middle of my wedding day. I would have made the same decision in her place. What changed everything for Elena was seeing my mother take the bouquet out of my hands hours later and put it into Kelsey's. That was when the vague pronouns in the recording suddenly had names. After I watched the clip the next morning, Mom's sentence angered me. But Dad's was the one that stayed. She'll get over it. I had spent years hearing softer versions of the same belief. Claire will understand. Claire can handle it. Claire is independent. Claire doesn't need as much help. They had always sounded like compliments if I did not examine them too closely. Hearing my father say it while discussing something they were planning to do against my wishes made the translation impossible to ignore. They were not saying I was strong. They were saying my strength made the consequences cheaper. And by the time they stood in that prep room 6 weeks after I had already told Kelsey no, neither of them was asking whether they had the right to take something from me. They were only calculating how quickly I would forgive them. By the time Evan and I got home the day after the wedding, I had stopped thinking of what happened as a family argument. Arguments are messy, emotional things where people say more than they mean and later disagree about how it started. What I had in my phone was different. I had a recording made before the reception, a written refusal from months earlier, and a content creator who had been given instructions I had never approved. That did not tell me the whole story, but it told me enough to stop treating the bouquet as the problem. The bouquet was the moment the problem became visible. Evan carried our overnight bags inside while I went straight to the kitchen table with my laptop. He watched me open it and said, "You know you don't have to solve this today." He was not telling me to let it go. He knew me better than that. He was reminding me that we had been married for less than 24 hours and I had slept badly enough to feel it behind my eyes. "I'm not solving it," I said. "I'm making sure I know what exists before anyone decides it doesn't." That distinction mattered to me. I did not want to call Mom while I was furious, and I definitely did not want to accuse Kelsey of something I could not yet prove. But I had watched my parents turn a planned act into a supposed misunderstanding in less than a minute. I was not going to give them 3 days to do the same thing with everything else. Elena had already sent the original video file from the floral prep area. I downloaded it to my laptop, saved a second copy to cloud storage, and left the original untouched. I did not edit the audio, increase the volume, clip the beginning, or create a dramatic version for anyone else to hear. The file started with several minutes of Elena working. Her hands moved in and out of frame arranging stems, while venue noise came and went behind her. My parents entered the conversation only because they had chosen to speak within range of a phone that was already recording. That was important to me, not because I was planning a lawsuit, but because I knew exactly what Mom would say if I gave her room. She would claim Elena had been spying on her. The raw file made that story much harder to sell. I played it once with Evan sitting beside me. Neither of us said anything until Dad's voice came through the speakers. "And if Claire gets angry? Then Mom. She won't ruin her own wedding over a bouquet. Then Dad. She'll get over it." Evan leaned back slowly. He knew. I nodded. At the reception, I had already understood that Dad was not surprised by the plan, but hearing the whole sequence at home made it impossible to reduce his role to a bad reaction in the moment. He had known there was something to manage. He had known I might be angry. His solution had been to assume I would absorb it. Evan's first instinct was to call him. I could tell before he even reached for his phone. "Don't," I said. He looked at me. "I'm not going to yell at him." "I know. Then why not?" I closed the video and opened a new folder on my laptop. Because right now they know what we know about the bouquet. They don't know what Jenna told us. Evan considered that for a second. "You think they'll start deleting things?" "I think people who call something a misunderstanding usually become very interested in cleaning up the parts that make it look intentional." I named the folder with the wedding date and nothing more dramatic. No evidence, no fraud, no Kelsey lies. I was angry, but I did not want anger naming facts for me. Inside it, I created separate folders for Elena's raw file, my messages with Kelsey, Jenna's material, and vendor documents. That was probably the occupational therapist in me coming out. At work, when a patient's progress depended on 5 people remembering the same information, I learned quickly that memory was not a system. Documentation was. Before I contacted anyone else, I went back through my text thread with Kelsey. It did not take long to find the conversation from January. She had asked about portfolio pictures. I had said, "You can come as my sister. My wedding isn't a styled shoot for your business." A few messages later, she had written, "Fine, forget I asked." I took screenshots that included the date and the surrounding context, then exported the conversation. That removed one possible future argument immediately. She could say my no was unfair. She could say I had misunderstood her request. What she could not honestly say was that I had never given an answer. Jenna emailed me that afternoon. Her subject line was simple: "Documents from Marilyn Bennett Booking." She apologized again in the first paragraph, not for filming at the wedding, but for assuming I knew the purpose of the material she had been asked to capture. She said she had reviewed her paperwork before sending anything and confirmed there was no confidentiality clause, preventing her from showing me the booking brief, usage terms, or files my mother had sent her. I appreciated that she had checked instead of panicking and dumping everything into my inbox. It also told me Jenna understood that whatever this was, she did not want to become careless just because my family had been. The first attachment was her standard service agreement. I had technically seen part of it before the wedding because the coordinator had required vendor paperwork, but I had never had a reason to study the usage section. Jenna retained ownership of her raw footage. Mom's package covered personal and family social use. If footage was going to be used to advertise a separate business, that business needed a commercial license from Jenna in writing. Kelsey Bennett Events was not named anywhere in the contract as a licensee. I read that paragraph twice, then looked at Evan. "This matters, because Kelsey can't use the footage?" he asked. "Not automatically. Even if Mom paid Jenna, that doesn't mean Mom bought the right to hand the videos to Kelsey's business." That did not prove the plan, but it closed a door I had not known existed. If Kelsey had expected the wedding footage to become business content, someone had either misunderstood the contract or assumed Jenna would simply cooperate later. Neither possibility made me feel better. Then I opened the booking brief. At first, it looked harmless. Venue arrival, floral details, guests entering, bridesmaids getting ready, reception room before doors opened. There were notes about vertical clips and short candid moments. Then the instructions changed. A separate section was labeled Kelsey Content. I read it slowly. Kelsey walking through reception space before guest entry. Kelsey adjusting tablescape details. Kelsey beside floral installation. Kelsey checking stationery presentation. Kelsey near cake display. Then the line Jenna had shown me at the reception. Clean hero shot Kelsey with bridal bouquet. Below it was another note. Avoid bride in selected portfolio clips where possible. He sat back. Evan read over my shoulder. "That's not family footage." "No, that's a shoot." Yes. The word mattered because it changed the scale of what my parents had done. Mom had not seen a pretty bouquet in my hands and spontaneously decided Kelsey should have a picture with it. Someone had planned a visual sequence in advance. The bouquet was one piece of a larger image set designed to place Kelsey inside the finished wedding as if she had been responsible for it. For the first few minutes, I still reached for the simplest explanation. Maybe Mom wanted Kelsey to look important. Maybe this was another version of the favoritism I had known all my life, only filtered through a camera. There was something almost comforting about that possibility, because I understood it. Mom had spent years putting Kelsey at the center of things she had not earned because she believed attention itself could become confidence. It would have been ugly, but familiar. Then I noticed the wording. Selected portfolio clips. Not family clips. Not sister content. Portfolio. I emailed Jenna one question before calling her. "When you read this, whose portfolio did you think it meant?" She called me less than 5 minutes later. "Kelsey's," she said. "Why?" "Because that was how your mother described it." "Exactly how?" Jenna hesitated. She said Kelsey had helped with creative direction and wanted behind-the-scenes material showing her involvement. I looked at the floral mock-ups, still stacked in a storage bin near the dining room wall. She didn't help with creative direction. I know that now. What did you think she had done? I thought she had been involved in styling. Maybe not officially on the vendor list, but I assumed she had worked with you and the planner. It's not unusual for someone building a portfolio to collaborate with family on an event. That didn't happen. I believe you. There was no defensiveness in Jenna's voice, which made it easier to keep my own under control. She had been given false information, but she had not invented it. Did Kelsey ever contact you directly? No. Everything came through my mother? Everything. That surprised me. If Kelsey wanted the footage for her business, why had Mom handled the booking? Did Mom ever tell you I had approved the portfolio content? Not in those words. What did she say? She said the family was helping Kelsey build her business and that you wanted the wedding to be useful for everyone. I almost laughed. It was such a perfectly Maryland sentence. Not a direct lie that could be quoted later. Just a version of reality with the consent already baked in. Jenna, when I told you to stop filming at the reception, you stopped immediately. Yes. If you had known I had already told Kelsey no months earlier, would you have taken those shots? No. She answered fast enough that I believed her. Then I'm not blaming you. The relief in her silence told me she had expected otherwise. There are more attachments, she said carefully. I think you should look at the storyboard next. I saw the file name. That's not the only thing in the email. What else? There's a forwarded message from Kelsey. I stared at my inbox. I had not opened the original email file yet, only the attachments. Did you read it? Not closely when your mother sent it. I was looking for visual instructions. She forwarded the whole thing instead of copying the relevant notes. That detail would matter later. At the time, I was more interested in why a private message from Kelsey had been sent to a vendor at all. I thanked Jenna and told her not to change or delete anything. Then I hung up. Evan was watching me. Still don't want me to call your parents? More than ever. That wasn't my question. No. He smiled without humor. That's what I thought. I opened the storyboard. The first page had the venue name, the April date, and Kelsey Bennett events across the bottom in a clean serif font. There were no wedding photographs yet because our wedding had not happened when the file was created. Instead, there were images from the venue website, color references, floral inspiration, tabletop samples, and a few photographs Mom had apparently taken of materials from my wedding binder. That part made me feel violated in a way I had not expected. There was a picture of one of my stationery samples lying on my dining room table. I remembered when it had been taken. Mom had been at our house in February, supposedly helping me check the family addresses for invitations. I had stepped into the kitchen to refill coffee. She must have photographed the page while I was gone. Another slide contained a close crop of the floral palette Elena had made for me. Another showed part of our reception floor plan. None of those things were secrets. That was almost the point. Mom had not broken into my house or stolen a password. She had taken advantage of normal access, one small piece at a time, because normal access never felt dangerous until someone used it for something else. The title at the top of the second slide read, Bennett Signature Wedding Full Service Design Story. I scrolled. There was a proposed sequence for the final portfolio. Exterior venue, floral arch, stationery, table details, cake, Kelsey, reviewing finishing touches. Kelsey with bouquet, wide reception shot, and closing detail images. The language was not subtle. The storyboard was designed to tell a story in which Kelsey existed at every stage of the finished event. I said, She's trying to make herself look like the designer. Evan leaned closer. Could she claim she was just modeling? Not with this wording. I scrolled again. At the bottom of one slide was a label. Creative direction. Kelsey Bennett Events. I stopped there. For several seconds. I was more confused than angry. I had spent months making decisions with our planner and vendors. I had sat with Elena choosing flowers. I had gone through stationery revisions. Evan and I had approved rentals, layout changes, lighting, linens, cake design, menu cards, and seating. Kelsey had attended none of those vendor meetings. She had not created the concept. She had not coordinated the event. She had not made decisions. She had not even offered to help with logistics after I turned down the portfolio idea. Yet, 6 weeks before the wedding, someone had created a document that already assigned her creative direction for an event that had not happened. Evan said, "Maybe your mom made this without Kelsey." It was exactly the possibility I had been thinking about. Maybe. Would that surprise you? No. That was the first mistake I made in the investigation. I wanted the answer to be Mom because it fit the family structure I already knew. Mom pushed, Dad enabled. Kelsey benefited. That pattern had existed for years. It was easy to assume this was simply the most extreme version of the same thing. For the moment, I treated Kelsey as someone who might have agreed to Mom's plan without understanding how far it had gone. That was generous. It was also wrong. Before I reached the forwarded email, I decided I needed facts from the people who had actually built the wedding. I started with Marcus because the storyboard clearly anticipated professional-looking images. I emailed him a short explanation and asked whether anyone in my family had requested photographs from him for commercial use. He called instead of replying. "Your mother asked me at the reception whether Kelsey could get copies of some detail shots," he said. "When?" "Before everything happened with the bouquet." "What did you tell her?" "That you and Evan were my clients, and any gallery requests went through you." I thought she wanted copies for family. Did she mention Kelsey's business? No. That told me Mom had been trying more than one route. I asked Marcus whether Kelsey could take images from our wedding gallery and use them as portfolio photographs for her business. "Not just because she appears in them," he said. "My contract with you covers your wedding use. Commercial advertising is separate. If somebody wants to use my work to market a business, they ask me. If she asks, depends what she's claiming." I told him about the storyboard. There was a pause. "She didn't design your wedding." "No." "Then, I'm not licensing my work to make it look like she did." I thanked him and saved a note of the conversation, then followed up by email so there would be a written record. I did not ask him to threaten Kelsey. I did not ask him to post anything. I asked him to confirm what the rights were before I decided what to do next. Then I emailed our planner and our stationery designer with essentially the same two questions: who had given them the creative brief, and whether Kelsey had provided any design direction or coordination services. The planner answered first. "You and Evan were the clients. All design approvals came from you. Kelsey did not act as planner, coordinator, designer, or authorized representative on this event." Our stationery designer answered less than an hour later. "All concept direction and approvals came from you. I had no communication with Kelsey regarding design." Elena's answer was even simpler. "I designed the florals with you. Kelsey did not direct or approve any element of my work." I saved all three. Only then did I look at the contracts themselves. They did not prove everything by themselves. A person can influence design without signing a vendor agreement, and I knew better than to stretch paperwork beyond what it actually showed. But the contracts established who the clients were and who had been hired to perform the work. Combined with the vendor's direct statements, the picture became much harder to blur. I had created a simple document for myself by then. On the left, I listed what Kelsey's storyboard appeared to claim. On the right, I listed what I could verify. Full service design, no. Floral creative direction, no. Stationery design direction, no. Planning, coordination, no. Client approval authority, no. The only thing Kelsey had definitely done was ask to be photographed next to the finished work. That fact bothered me more the longer I looked at it. Evan made coffee while I worked. At one point, he set a mug beside me and said, "You know what I hate about this?" "What?" "They counted on you not checking." He was right. The plan only worked if I saw a few odd photographs and decided they were too petty to fight about. Kelsey standing beside an arch. Kelsey holding a bouquet. Kelsey touching a place card. Each image by itself was harmless. Put together with a false caption, they became experience. That was when I stopped thinking of the photos as vanity. They were evidence for a story someone planned to sell. I finally opened the email Marilyn had forwarded to Jenna. The top message was from Mom. It was brief and cheerful. She told Jenna the attached storyboard would explain the look Kelsey is trying to build, and that Jenna should focus on the cleanest versions of the listed shots. Mom wrote that Kelsey had several promising inquiries and needed stronger material to show what she can do. Below that was quoted text from an earlier email. I saw Kelsey's name. I did not read the whole chain immediately because the first thing that caught my attention was an attachment listed under Kelsey's message. The file name included the words Client Preview Deck. I opened that instead. The cover page had Kelsey Bennett Events at the top. Below it was the name of our venue. Then a line that made my stomach tighten. Full-service wedding design and styling spring signature event. The file creation date was from before our wedding. There were no finished wedding photographs yet, but the deck contained the same mock-ups and visual references from the storyboard, arranged as if they represented work Kelsey Bennett Events had already developed. A note near the end promised updated event photography following April installation. Not wedding, installation. My wedding had become an installation in a sales document before I had even walked down the aisle. I clicked through the remaining pages more slowly. There were sections for concept, florals, reception styling, stationery integration, and guest experience. Some production vendors were named in small type, including Elena's studio, but the overall creative direction was attributed to Kelsey's business. That distinction was deliberate enough that I could no longer tell myself Mom was simply trying to give Kelsey pretty photographs. I went back to the storyboard, then to the brief, then to my January message telling Kelsey no. The sequence was beginning to make sense. Kelsey had asked to use the wedding for portfolio images. I refused. 6 weeks before the wedding, a storyboard existed assigning her creative direction anyway. Mom hired Jenna to create the missing visual proof. The shot list specifically required Kelsey to appear inside completed design elements. The bouquet was the clean hero shot, and my parents had discussed making sure I could not take it back before the picture was secured. I still did not know how much of the plan belonged to Kelsey and how much belonged to Mom. That question mattered, because I was not willing to punish my sister for things my mother might have done in her name. Anger did not give me permission to skip facts. So I opened the forwarded email again. This time, instead of looking at the attachments, I scrolled down toward the quoted conversation between Kelsey and Mom. I stopped before reading it, not because I was afraid of what it said. I was afraid of what I would do with it if it confirmed what I was starting to suspect. Evan must have seen something change in my face because he came around the table. What is it? I don't know yet. That bad? I'm trying not to decide before I read it. He pulled out the chair beside me and sat down. I looked again at the first line of Kelsey's quoted email, then closed the message. Evan raised an eyebrow. Not yet, I said. I want to know whether this deck was actually sent to clients before I decide what that email means. He studied me for a second, then nodded. Okay, that was the difference between anger and evidence. Anger wanted the worst interpretation immediately. Evidence made me earn it. I opened the properties on the client preview deck and then returned to Jenna's attachments. The file name, dates, and references showed the material had been prepared weeks before the wedding. More importantly, Mom's cover email mentioned the people Kelsey is already talking to, and said getting the April footage quickly would help her finish the case study. I read that phrase twice. Finish the case study, not start one. Finish it. That meant the wedding was already being presented as something belonging to Kelsey's professional history before there was even a finished event to photograph. I looked across the table at Evan. This isn't about stealing attention at the wedding. He nodded slowly. No. I turned the laptop so he could see the cover slide. Full-service wedding design and styling Kelsey Bennett Events. My sister wasn't trying to look like the bride, I said. She was trying to look like the person who created the bride's wedding. And for the first time since Mom had taken the bouquet out of my hands, I understood what I actually needed to find out. Not why they wanted Kelsey holding my flowers. What they had already told other people those flowers proved. The first thing I did the next morning was stop calling it a portfolio problem in my own head. A portfolio problem sounded cosmetic, like Kelsey had stretched the truth in a caption or used an image she should have credited differently. What I was looking at was more deliberate than that. She had created a professional case study before my wedding happened, then built a plan to manufacture the photographs she would need to make that case study look real. I still did not know whether she had already shown the deck to paying clients, and I was not willing to accuse her of selling something she had only drafted. So I started with the people whose work the deck claimed to represent. I called Elena first because the floral section bothered me most. The deck named her studio in small type under production, which at first looked almost respectful, but the larger heading above it read, Creative Direction and Floral Styling, Kelsey Bennett Events. That wording gave Kelsey ownership of the concept while reducing Elena to execution. It suggested Elena had simply produced a design Kelsey created. The truth was the opposite. Elena and I had spent weeks talking about scale, color, movement, texture, what would survive April weather, what would photograph well inside the glass house, and what could be moved efficiently from ceremony to reception. Kelsey had not been part of one of those conversations. I sent Elena the relevant slide before I called. She answered after a minute and said, "That is not what happened." I know. She never gave me creative direction. I know that too. I need you to tell me exactly what did happen, because I don't want to turn a lie into a bigger lie by overstating the correction. That was important to me. I did not want to become sloppy just because Kelsey had been. Elena explained that I had given the initial references. We had refined the floral concept together, and she had developed the actual floral design based on the venue, season, budget, mechanics, and my preferences. Kelsey had no approval authority and had never contacted Elena about the design. Elena then sent me the email chain from our original floral consultations, showing the revisions had gone between her and me directly. The planner gave me the same kind of answer. She had created the overall wedding timeline and coordinated vendors based on decisions Evan and I approved. Kelsey had not joined planning calls, revised the floor plan, selected rentals, managed the timeline, or acted as our representative. Our stationery designer confirmed all visual approvals had come from me. Marcus confirmed again that Kelsey had no role in directing his work. One by one, the pieces in the deck lost any defensible interpretation. Kelsey had not collaborated quietly behind the scenes. She had not been an unpaid assistant. She had not been a family member who happened to help with some design details. She had been my sister attending my wedding. The contracts helped establish who had hired whom, but I was careful not to pretend they proved more than they did. A person can influence a design without signing a contract. That was why I wanted direct confirmation from the vendors themselves. By noon, I had enough to make a simple chart for myself. The left side listed what Kelsey's deck claimed. The right side listed what the people who actually did the work confirmed. Creative direction, Claire and vendors. Floral design, Elena with Claire. Planning and coordination planner with Claire and Evan. Stationery direction, Claire with designer. Photography, Marcus. Kelsey's role guest. Seeing it reduced to 6 lines made me angrier than the deck had. The deck had relied on complexity. Weddings involve enough people that most outsiders will not know who made which decision. Kelsey could say, "I worked on the design," and a prospective client might reasonably assume she meant something substantial. Add polished photographs of her touching centerpieces, standing beside the floral arch, and holding the bridal bouquet, and the claim would look self-evident. That was the point of the images. They did not have to prove anything. They only had to make people stop asking. Evan found me at the dining room table around lunchtime, still working through the materials. "You've been here for 4 hours, he said. "I know. You ate?" "I had coffee." That wasn't the question. I looked up at him. "I'm fine." He gave me a look that made me hear the words differently. I almost laughed. That sounded familiar. Yeah. I shut the laptop halfway. I hate that phrase now. I know. He sat across from me. "What have you got?" I turned the chart toward him. He read it, then looked at the client preview deck again. Could she say she just assembled the aesthetic? She could say anything. I'm trying to figure out what she said to actual clients. "And you still haven't read the whole forwarded email?" "Not yet." "Why?" "Because if I read one bad sentence and decide it proves everything, I'm no better than somebody looking at one photo of Kelsey holding my bouquet and deciding she designed the wedding." Evan nodded slowly. "Fair." That was not restraint for the sake of keeping peace. It was restraint because I wanted the truth strong enough to survive being challenged. I started with the deck, instead. The client preview file had been created 6 weeks before the wedding. The early slides used venue photos, digital mock-ups, pieces of my stationery proof, screenshots from Elena's floral proposal, and photos Mom had apparently taken of pages from my printed planning binder. Some of those images were generic enough that I might never have recognized their source if I had not spent months staring at them. Others were unmistakably mine. One photograph showed the corner of my kitchen table. I knew exactly when Mom had taken it. She had come over in February to help me check addresses for older relatives whose information she said was outdated. I had left the binder open while I made coffee. In the photograph, part of my ceramic fruit bowl was visible at the edge of the frame. Mom had cropped it badly enough that one blue stripe still showed. I stared at that blue stripe for a long time. There was no grand theft hidden in it. Mom had been in my house with permission. The binder had been on my table. She had taken a picture with her phone. That was all. But the fact that each step was ordinary did not make the final use ordinary. Another slide included Elena's floral palette, cropped so her logo was not visible. Another used a screenshot of our floor plan. Another showed the serif typeface our stationery designer had proposed. None of the pieces alone would have meant much. Together, they created the illusion of a project Kelsey had developed. I scrolled to a slide titled Design Intent. The language described balancing romantic garden softness with architectural restraint inside the restored glass house. I knew that wording because I had said almost the same thing to our planner during a design meeting. I could not prove Kelsey had copied my exact sentence, and I did not need to. The problem was bigger than one phrase. The entire deck was built from decisions other people had already made. The next slide was worse. Full-service wedding design and styling Kelsey Bennett events. Under that heading were bullet points for concept development, vendor integration, tablescape direction, floral vision, paper coordination, and guest experience. I read them twice. Then I called Kelsey. She answered on the 4th ring. Hi. Her voice was careful. I'm looking at the client deck. Silence. Then, what client deck? That answer lasted about 3 seconds. The one titled, Full Service Wedding Design and Styling. Another silence. Claire, Mom should not have sent you that. There it was. Not I don't know what you're talking about. Not that isn't mine. Not you've misunderstood. Mom should not have sent you that. She didn't, I said. She sent it to Jenna. Kelsey inhaled sharply. I continued before she could redirect me. Did you make this? It was a draft. That wasn't my question. Yes. Did you design my wedding? No. Did you direct Elena's floral work? No. Did you coordinate the planner? No. Did you select our stationery? No. Did you approve rentals, layout, cake, lighting, or photography? Claire, stop interrogating me. I'm asking whether the claims in your deck are true. She exhaled hard. The deck isn't a legal document. I almost smiled because of how quickly she had reached for that defense. I didn't say it was. It's marketing. That doesn't make accuracy optional. You're being deliberately literal. I'm being deliberately accurate. She shifted tone. I could hear it happen. Less defensive, more wounded. You know what I've been trying to build. Yes. You know how impossible it is to get clients when everyone wants to see experience before they'll give you experience. Yes. So I made a concept deck. With my wedding. With a wedding aesthetic I could execute. You didn't execute it. I could have. That sentence stopped me. Not because it was persuasive. Because it revealed the gap in how Kelsey thought. Ability and experience had become interchangeable in her mind. If she believed she could have done something, she felt entitled to show people the result as if she had. You're selling work you think you could have done, I said. I'm showing the level I can work at. Using work other people actually did. She was quiet. Then she said, Nobody lost anything. There it was again. The same family logic translated into business language. Nobody lost anything. I heard Mom asking, What would it hurt you? I heard Dad saying, She'll get over it. For the first time, I understood how deeply Kelsey had absorbed the same rule. If Claire survived, then Claire had not really been harmed. Elena lost credit, I said. The planner lost credit. The stationery designer lost credit. I lost ownership of decisions I made for my own wedding. You still had your wedding. That isn't an answer. You still had your flowers. I stared at the bouquet sitting in a vase on the kitchen counter, already beginning to soften at the edges. Eventually, I said. She went silent. I asked the question I had called for. Did you send this deck to clients before the wedding? It was private. That's not what I asked. I sent it to a few people I was talking to. How many? Why does that matter? How many? 3. I closed my eyes. Did any of them pay you? One paid for a consultation. For what? A planning consultation, Claire. Not for your wedding. Did she receive this deck before paying? Kelsey did not answer. That was enough for the moment. I was not going to turn a consultation fee into some dramatic criminal accusation. People pay consultants for many reasons. But the sequence mattered. A prospective client had been shown a deck implying full-service experience Kelsey did not have, then paid to speak with her professionally. That moved the lie out of the realm of private ambition. Send me the version you gave them. No. Kelsey. No, you already have enough. That is not your decision. You're not my boss. I'm not trying to be. I'm trying to find out what you used my wedding to claim. Her voice rose. You keep saying your wedding like you invented weddings. I sat very still. I'm saying my wedding because it was my wedding. You hired vendors. You picked flowers. You picked stationery. You didn't manufacture the chairs. And you did none of those things. She snapped. I know how to do them. Then do them on a wedding that hires you. That ended the call. She hung up. 5 minutes later, Mom called. I let it ring twice before answering. What did you say to your sister? I asked whether she sent prospective clients a deck claiming she designed my wedding. Mom did not sound surprised. That confirmed she already knew about the deck. She is trying to establish herself. By saying she did work she didn't do. You are reducing months of effort to one sentence. What months of effort? Mom paused. I waited. She developed the concept. No. The concept came from my planning meetings. She refined it. No. She has been studying events for years. Also irrelevant. Mom's voice sharpened. You are enjoying this. That accusation surprised me enough to make me laugh once. No. I got married 2 days ago. I would rather be doing almost anything else. You have always been so judgmental about Kelsey. I wanted her business to succeed. Then act like it. Success built on other people's work isn't success. You are making it sound like she stole your identity. I'm saying exactly what happened. She made a deck that says she gave creative direction to a wedding she did not design. It was a private presentation. For clients. Potential clients. That is still marketing. Mom sighed dramatically. You have no idea how hard she has worked. I looked at the chart in front of me. I know exactly how hard Elena worked. Claire. I know how hard the planner worked. I know how many revisions the stationery designer did. I know how many evenings Evan and I spent going through choices. What I don't know is what Kelsey did besides put her name on the finished result. You know what? This is why she doesn't come to you for help. She came to me for help. I said no. Mom stopped talking. It was the first time in the conversation she seemed to remember that part. I continued. She asked to use my wedding for portfolio shots. I refused. You knew I refused. I knew you were being difficult. That isn't the same thing as not understanding me. She only needed material to get started. She needed experience. She needed one chance. And you decided my wedding was that chance after I said no. Mom's breathing changed slightly. I knew I had reached the edge of something she did not want to admit yet. Did you tell Jenna that Kelsey helped design the wedding? I told Jenna enough to do the job I hired her for. Yes or no? You don't get to interrogate me either. There it was. The family response to specific questions was always the same when the answers were bad. Suddenly asking for clarity became aggression. I'm not asking you to confess to anything, I said. I'm asking because Jenna believed Kelsey was part of the design team. She misunderstood. She misunderstood because someone told her that. You are determined to make everyone the villain. No. I'm determined to know who did what. Mom's voice went cold. Be careful, Claire. With what? With how far you take this. I nearly asked what that meant, but I stopped myself. Threats are useful only if you make the other person explain them. Otherwise, you end up doing the work for them. How far am I taking it? I asked. She did not answer. Instead, she said, your sister's business could be seriously damaged if you start contacting people. I haven't contacted her clients. Keep it that way. That was interesting. Not, there are no clients. Not, the deck was never used. Keep it that way. I ended the call soon after. For a few minutes, I sat there staring at nothing. I had expected Mom to minimize the deck. I had not expected her to reveal how protective she was of the client side of it. That told me the next question I needed answered. Not what the deck said. Who had seen it? I did not contact Kelsey's prospects. I had no intention of hunting people down and announcing that my sister was dishonest. If I had done that, the story could have become about whether I was sabotaging her business. I wanted no part of that. If Kelsey's business could survive scrutiny, then it should. If it could not, that was not something I needed to engineer. Instead, I returned to Jenna's forwarded email. This time, I read the full message at the top. Mom wrote that the storyboard represented the look Kelsey wanted to build and that Jenna should prioritize the cleanest, most polished moments. She said Kelsey had several promising inquiries and that strong April footage would help her finish the case study. There it was, not hidden in metadata, not inferred from a file name, written in Mom's own email. Several promising inquiries. Finish the case study. I scrolled further. Below Mom's message was the original email from Kelsey. The quoted history had remained attached because Mom had simply hit forward and sent it to Jenna without cleaning up the thread. I saw lines about the portfolio sequence, the bouquet, the tables, and the need for images with as little visible bridal context as possible. I did not yet read every sentence. One section caught my attention first because it listed what Kelsey called active prospects. There were no full names, only first names and wedding months. 3 people. One had already booked a paid consultation. I sat back. That confirmed what Kelsey had admitted on the phone. The deck had not been an exercise. It had been shown to real prospective clients. I was still looking at the email when my phone rang. Elena. I answered. Hey, do you have a minute? Yes. I got an email that I think you should know about. My hand tightened around the phone. From who? A woman named Rebecca. She says she's considering Kelsey for her wedding. I looked at the list in the forwarded email. Rebecca was one of the 3 first names. What did she ask you? She said she saw my studio named in a Kelsey Bennett events deck and wanted to confirm something before she moved forward. Confirm what? Elena read from the message. She asked whether Kelsey provided the creative direction for the florals at the Bennett wedding. For a second, I did not say anything. The mechanism was suddenly visible from the client's side. Kelsey had included Elena's studio name because leaving all vendor credits off would have made the deck look suspicious. But by naming Elena as the production florist while claiming overall creative direction for herself, she had accidentally given a careful, prospective client someone independent to verify the story with. What did you tell her? I asked. The truth. That I designed the florals directly with you and that Kelsey did not give me creative direction. Good. She asked whether she could speak to the bride. I looked toward Evan, who had just walked into the room and could tell from my face something had changed. Did you give her my information? No. I told her I would ask you first. That mattered to me. Elena did not assume my answer. Even now, I thought about Mom's warning. Your sister's business could be seriously damaged if you start contacting people. I had not contacted anyone. Someone had contacted us. Tell her she can email me, I said. Elena hesitated. You sure? Yes. After we hung up, Evan sat across from me. What happened? One of Kelsey's prospects is checking references. And she found Elena? Kelsey put Elena's studio in the deck. Evan shook his head slowly. So Kelsey gave her the person who can contradict her. She probably thought listing a real vendor made the deck look more credible. Does it? It did. Until someone asked the vendor a question. My laptop chimed a few minutes later. The email came from Rebecca. She was polite, professional, and careful. She explained that she was considering hiring Kelsey Bennett Events for a larger full-service wedding and had been shown material from the Bennett event as an example of Kelsey's design work. She wanted to confirm Kelsey's role before making a decision. I read the email once. Then again. I knew what Mom wanted me to do. I knew what Kelsey needed me to do. I could write something vague. Kelsey was involved with the wedding. Technically she was. She attended. I could say, she has a strong eye and cares about design. Also true. I could answer every question, except the one Rebecca had actually asked, and let her walk away believing whatever Kelsey had already told her. It would cost me almost nothing. That was the old calculation. What would it hurt? I looked at the evidence folder on my laptop and understood why that question had become dangerous in my family. It always measured the immediate cost to me and ignored the cost of the lie to everyone else. Rebecca was deciding whether to trust Kelsey with her own wedding. Elena's work had already been misrepresented. The planner's work had been misrepresented. Mine had been used to support a claim I had explicitly refused. I did not need to destroy my sister's business. I only needed to decide whether I was willing to help hold it up. I opened a reply. Before I typed, my phone lit up with a text from Mom. Please think about what you're doing before you answer anyone. Kelsey's future could depend on this. I read it twice. Then I looked at Rebecca's question again. Was Kelsey the lead designer for your wedding? For the first time in my life, the answer felt easier than keeping the peace. I answered Rebecca's email without calling anyone first. That mattered to me because I knew exactly what my family would do if I gave them a chance to negotiate the wording. Mom would ask me to soften it. Dad would suggest something neutral. Kelsey would insist that a technically true phrase was close enough. By the time all three of them were finished, I would be staring at a paragraph that said almost nothing while allowing Rebecca to believe exactly what Kelsey wanted her to believe. So I kept my reply short. I told her that Evan and I had hired the wedding vendors directly, that Elena had developed the floral design with me, that our planner had handled planning and coordination, and that Kelsey had attended as my sister. Then I answered the question Rebecca had actually asked. Kelsey had not been the lead designer of our wedding and had not provided the overall creative direction shown in the deck. I read the email twice before sending it. There was nothing vindictive in it, no mention of the bouquet, no recording, no accusation that Kelsey was dishonest. I did not tell Rebecca what she should do. I simply removed the parts of the story that were not true. Then I hit send. For about 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then Rebecca replied. She thanked me for being clear and asked a more specific question. Kelsey's proposal, she said, described experience with vendor integration, concept development, tablescape styling, floral direction, and day of execution. Rebecca wanted to know whether Kelsey had performed any of those functions at our wedding in an informal capacity, even if she had not been the contracted lead. That was a better question than the first one. I did not answer from memory. I opened the contracts again, then the emails I had received from the planner, Elena, the stationery designer, and Marcus. I made sure I was not overstating Kelsey's absence simply because I was angry. She had attended as family. She had been physically present during parts of setup because she was in the wedding party area with everyone else. She might have moved a chair, handed someone a ribbon, or commented that a table looked pretty. That was not the same thing as design or coordination. So, I replied with the distinction. Kelsey had not directed vendors, approved design changes, created the timeline, coordinated setup, developed the floral concept, or acted as an authorized representative for Evan or me. If Rebecca wanted information about any specific service, I could tell her which vendor had actually provided it. I sent that one too. An hour later, Rebecca thanked me and said she needed to reconsider the scope of the proposal she had received. That was all. No dramatic cancellation email, no declaration that Kelsey would never work again. Just a woman making a business decision based on information she should have had from the beginning. Mom called 15 minutes after that. I let it ring. Then Dad called. I let that ring too. Evan looked up from the other end of the couch. You expecting them to come over? Yes. You want me here? Yes. He nodded and went back to what he was doing. They arrived just before 6. Mom came in first, already angry. Dad followed with the expression he wore when he believed the situation had become unnecessarily complicated and was waiting for the most reasonable person in the room to fix it. I had seen that expression at birthdays, holidays, family dinners, and once in the parking lot outside a restaurant after Kelsey screamed at Mom over something so small I could not remember it now. Mom did not sit down. "What did you tell Rebecca?" "The truth." "That is not an answer. It is exactly the answer." Dad closed the front door behind him. "Claire, nobody is saying you should lie." I looked at him. "Good." Mom folded her arms. "You could have explained that Kelsey helped." "With what?" Mom blinked. I waited. "She helped with the overall look." "With what part of the overall look?" "You know what I mean." "No, I don't." Dad stepped in. "She contributed." "To what?" He frowned. "Claire." "To what, Dad?" The room went quiet. I had spent most of my life watching vague words do a surprising amount of work in my family. Helped, contributed, supported, needed, family, fair. Those words could stretch around almost any fact if nobody asked for definitions. This time I asked. Mom said, "She gave you ideas." "Which ones?" "She talked to you about flowers. Elena designed the florals with me. She has an eye for color." "That isn't a service she provided." "She talked about tables. Our planner did the tables." Mom's face flushed. "Do you hear yourself? You're acting like every conversation needed an invoice." "No, I'm asking you what you want me to tell a prospective client Kelsey actually did." Dad rubbed his forehead. "Just say she contributed creatively." "To what?" He looked at Mom. Mom looked at him. Neither answered. I leaned back against the kitchen counter. "That's the problem. You want me to replace a specific lie with a vague one." "It is not a lie," Mom snapped. "Then name the contribution." She opened her mouth and stopped. Dad tried another direction. "This woman was considering hiring Kelsey. You know how much something like that could change her business?" "I do." "And you still sent that email?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because she asked me whether Kelsey designed my wedding." "You could have said it was complicated." "It wasn't." Mom shook her head. "You have always been so rigid." "No. I'm being accurate. You are ruining an opportunity over semantics." I stared at her. "You think the difference between doing the work and not doing the work is semantics? She can do the work." "That is not what Rebecca asked." "But she can." There it was again. The same argument Kelsey had made. I could have done it. As if potential created a retroactive right to somebody else's result. Dad stepped closer to the table. "No one is asking you to say she ran the entire wedding. The deck says full-service wedding design and styling. It's marketing language. So, does marketing language stop meaning anything when it becomes inconvenient?" Mom threw up her hands. "You want us to say we were wrong? Fine, we were wrong about the pictures. Is that enough?" "No." Her eyes narrowed. "Of course it isn't. It isn't enough because you're apologizing for pictures. I'm asking why you wanted me to lie to a client today." "We didn't ask you to lie. You drove to my house because I told her Kelsey didn't design my wedding. We came because you are escalating this. I answered a reference request. You knew what would happen." "No, Mom." "Kelsey knew what could happen when she put my wedding in a client deck." Dad took a long breath. "This is going nowhere." I looked at him. "It's going somewhere. You just don't like where." For years, Dad had treated any conversation that reached accountability as evidence. The conversation had become unproductive. If everyone was still discussing feelings, he was comfortable. If somebody started naming decisions, he wanted peace. I realized then that I had helped train him. Not intentionally. I had simply made myself easy to manage. When Mom borrowed something and returned it late, I did not argue because I could replace it. When Kelsey needed a contact I had spent time finding, I sometimes gave it to her because making another call was easier than listening to Mom explain why Kelsey needed the connection more. At a charity fundraiser years earlier, I had organized vendors, secured the venue, and coordinated volunteers. Mom later told relatives that the girls had put it together, then spent 10 minutes praising Kelsey for helping choose table decorations. I remembered noticing. I remembered being annoyed. I also remembered deciding it was not worth correcting. That was my mistake. Not because I should have started a fight every time someone minimized me. Because I had believed a small lie stayed small if I was strong enough to ignore it. My family had learned the opposite lesson. They learned that if the immediate cost to me was low enough, I would choose efficiency over correction. Dad saw my expression change. What? I'm thinking. About what? How many times I've heard some version of this. Mom sighed. Please don't start dragging childhood into a business disagreement. I'm not talking about childhood. Then what? I'm talking about every time something was easier to give to Kelsey because I could manage without it. That is not fair. Why? You had more. More what? Mom hesitated. More confidence. More stability. More ability to absorb it? Dad looked away. That told me more than an argument would have. The doorbell rang. Mom closed her eyes for half a second. I knew before I opened the door that it was Kelsey. She came in with her purse still over one shoulder and looked at our parents before looking at me. Can we talk without turning this into a courtroom? I'm not the one who brought a group. Mom said, we came because your sister refuses to understand the damage she's doing. Kelsey flinched slightly. Mom, stop. That surprised me. Mom looked at her. I'm defending you. I know. Then let me. Kelsey shook her head and finally looked at me. Can we sit down? We did. For the first time since the wedding, all three of them were in front of me, without a reception full of people around us. Evan stayed in the room but did not join the conversation unless someone addressed him. Kelsey clasped her hands on the table. Rebecca emailed me. What did she say? She said she needs to reconsider whether I have the experience level she wants. That sounds reasonable. Kelsey's face tightened. Do you have to say everything like that? Like what? Like you're at work. I almost answered defensively, then stopped. Maybe she was right about that part. When I felt cornered, I became precise. Precision was how I kept emotion from making decisions for me. It could sound cold. I'm angry, I said. If you want a less clinical version, I'm angry that you used my wedding to make your business look more experienced than it is. She looked down at her hands. I know, Mom immediately said. Kelsey? Kelsey held up one hand. Mom actually stopped. I know I shouldn't have used the deck that way, Kelsey said. That way? She looked up. As if it was completed work. You mean as if it was your work? Yes. The word seemed difficult for her. I waited. She took a breath. You don't understand what it's like to start with nothing. I nearly laughed, but there was enough genuine hurt in her face that I did not. I started my career too. That's different. Why? You followed a path, school, training, job. You knew what came next. That doesn't mean it was easy. I didn't say it was easy. You just said I don't know what it's like to start with nothing. Kelsey pressed her lips together. You always make everything look easy. That stopped me. Not because it was insulting. Because it sounded true to her. She continued before I could answer. You get a degree, you get a job, people trust you, you plan a wedding, you hire people, everything looks beautiful. You walk into a room and everybody assumes you know what you're doing. That didn't happen by accident. I know. Do you? She looked at me then, and for a moment I could see something underneath the defensiveness. Envy, yes, but also admiration she had never learned how to carry without resenting me for it. I know you worked for it, she said. That's not what I mean. Then what do you mean? I mean people already trust you. I waited. She swallowed. I just needed them to trust me once. The room became very quiet. There was more honesty in that sentence than in anything Kelsey had said since the wedding. I understood the feeling. That did not make the solution acceptable. Trust isn't something you borrow from somebody else and give back later, I said. I wasn't trying to hurt you. You knew I said no. Her eyes shifted away. Mom moved in immediately. She knew you were being protective of your wedding. That's not the same as knowing you'd object to every use of every detail. I looked at Kelsey. Did you know I would object? She did not answer. Kelsey. She rubbed her thumb against the side of her index finger. I knew you probably wouldn't like it. That isn't what I asked. Dad said, Claire, she is sitting here admitting she made a mistake. I'm asking what mistake she knew she was making. You don't have to humiliate her. I'm not. Kelsey looked at him. Dad, stop. He leaned back. She turned to me again. I knew you wouldn't say yes if I asked again. That was closer. So you didn't ask? No. And Mom hired Jenna. Yes. And the plan was to get the shots anyway. Kelsey hesitated. Yes. Mom said, that was my decision. I looked at her. We'll get to yours. Her face hardened. I turned back to Kelsey. Did you expect me to find out? I thought you might see some of the pictures. And? I thought you'd be mad. And then what? She did not answer. I already knew. I wanted to hear whether she would say it. And then what, Kelsey? Her shoulders dropped slightly. I thought you'd move on. There it was. Not a misunderstanding. A calculation. I sat back. For a second, the whole room seemed rearranged around that sentence. Kelsey had not mistaken my boundary for uncertainty. She had understood it and decided my reaction was manageable. Mom spoke quickly. She means eventually. Families move past things. No, I said. She means she knew I'd be angry and decided it was worth it. Kelsey looked miserable. I didn't think it would become this. What did you think would happen? I thought I'd get the pictures, you'd be annoyed, Mom would talk to you, and eventually it would be over. The honesty hurt more than another lie would have. Because it matched the plan exactly. I looked at Dad. And you? He rubbed his jaw. I didn't know every detail. But you knew about the bouquet. Yes. You knew Mom planned to give it to Kelsey after I'd already said no. I knew there was going to be a photograph. And you thought I'd get over it? He looked down. Yes. I could feel anger starting to rise again, but this time it was cleaner. They had not failed to understand me. They had understood me well enough to weaponize the part of me they trusted most. My restraint. Mom pushed her chair back. This has gone far enough. You got your answers. No, I said. I got some of them. She stared at me. I stood, walked to the counter, and opened my laptop. I had not planned to show them the forwarded email. I still did not know whether that would help or simply turn the conversation into another fight over wording. But Kelsey had admitted enough that I no longer needed the email to establish the basic point. What I needed now was to know how early the calculation had been made. I opened Marilyn's forwarded message to Jenna. At the wedding, I had focused on the storyboard. The day after, I had focused on the client preview deck. When I first skimmed the quoted email history, I had noticed Kelsey's references to prospects and the need for photographs. I had not read every line in order. Now I did. The first relevant message was from Kelsey. She wrote that she needed the wedding to look like a complete high-end event in her portfolio, and that isolated detail images would not be enough. Then came the sentence I had seen part of before. If I can get clean shots without Claire in them, I can finally make the event look like one of mine. I felt something in my chest tighten. Below it was Mom's reply. Will Claire agree to that? Kelsey's answer was one word. Probably not. Then another line. She already got weird when I asked about portfolio pictures. Mom replied that they could work around that. And then Kelsey wrote the sentence that changed the last remaining part of the story for me. But once everything's set up, what is she really going to do? I stopped reading. Evan was behind me now, close enough to see the screen. I did not need him to say anything. Mom must have understood what I was looking at because she stood. Claire. I turned the laptop toward the table. Kelsey read the lines. Her face drained. Dad leaned forward, then sat back again. Mom's reaction was different. She looked angry that the words existed in a form she could not redirect. That was a private conversation, she said. I looked at her. That is what you're worried about? I'm saying it was written in frustration. No. It was written while you were planning how to ignore my answer. Kelsey said quietly. I forgot Mom forwarded that. I almost laughed. Of course she had. The plan depended on everyone else forgetting too. I read the sequence one more time. Will Claire agree? Probably not. What is she really going to do? That was the entire betrayal in 3 lines. They had not misunderstood my no. They had not assumed I would be secretly pleased. They had not thought the pictures were harmless. They had asked themselves what I would do if they ignored me. Then they built the plan around the answer. I closed the laptop. For years, I had thought my family took things from me because they did not understand where my limits were. I finally understood the truth. They knew exactly where my limits were. They just knew how rarely I made them pay for crossing them. The morning after my parents and Kelsey left our house, I opened the evidence folder and did something that probably disappointed the angriest part of me. I wrote down what I was not going to do. I was not going to contact every person on Kelsey's prospect list. I was not going to post Elena's recording. I was not going to send the storyboard to relatives with a caption explaining what kind of people my parents were. I was not going to search for every place Kelsey had mentioned my wedding and demand that somebody punish her. If a client asked me a direct question, I would answer it truthfully. If a vendor discovered that their work had been misrepresented, they could decide how to protect it. Beyond that, I was not going to become the engine of Kelsey's destruction just because she had made herself vulnerable to one. Evan read the list over my shoulder. Rules for revenge? Rules for me. He smiled slightly. That sounds healthier. It's practical. That sounds more like you. I did not feel healthy. I felt furious. But anger made limits more important, not less. I knew how easy it would be to justify almost anything with the phrase "they deserve it." My parents had spent years deciding what I could absorb because they believed their intentions were good. I was not interested in building my own version of that logic. The first people I contacted were not Kelsey's clients. They were the people whose work appeared in her deck. I started with Jenna because her footage had been central to the plan from the beginning. By then, she had already reviewed her contract carefully and sent me the relevant section. Marilyn had hired her for personal and family social coverage. Jenna retained ownership of the raw footage. The package gave Mom a limited license to share clips personally, but it did not allow her to sublicense them to another business for advertising. Kelsey Bennett Events had never purchased commercial rights. I called Jenna and asked one question. If Kelsey asks you now for a commercial license to use the footage from my wedding, what would you do? I'd say no. Because of what happened? Partly. But mostly because I don't license footage to support a claim I know is false. That was important. I did not ask Jenna to refuse. She had already made the decision herself. She continued. If she wanted a clip of herself at a family wedding and labeled it honestly, that would be a different conversation. But the storyboard says she wants to use the footage as proof of design work. I'm not attaching my work to that. I thanked her and asked her to put the licensing position in an email, not as ammunition against Kelsey, but so nobody could later pretend the terms had been vague. She did. Marcus was next. He had already told me he would not license his photographs for a commercial portfolio that misrepresented Kelsey's role. This time, I asked him to confirm it in writing. His email was concise. He owned the copyright to the photographs under our contract, and any commercial use required separate permission. Kelsey Bennett Events had no such permission. He also said he would not authorize the images for marketing that falsely implied Kelsey designed or produced the event. I read the email twice and saved it. That closed the two most obvious image sources. Mom had paid Jenna because she believed she was buying the footage Kelsey needed. She had assumed Marcus's finished photographs could provide anything Jenna missed. Neither assumption survived contact with the actual contracts. What happened next was quieter than I expected. Elena emailed Kelsey directly. She copied me, but only after sending it. Her message was professional and almost painfully polite. She identified the floral work in the deck that had been produced by her studio and explained that she had developed the design directly with me. She asked Kelsey to remove or revise any wording, suggesting Kelsey Bennett Events had provided floral creative direction. There was no threat, no demand for a public apology, no mention of friendship. Just a correction. Kelsey replied 3 hours later. I never said I physically arranged the flowers. Elena answered. That is not the issue. The deck attributes creative direction for the floral design to your company. That is inaccurate. Please correct it. Kelsey did not respond again that day. Our planner handled it similarly. She told Kelsey that the event had been planned and coordinated under her company's contract with Evan and me, and that Kelsey had not provided planning, coordination, or design services. The stationery designer asked that photographs or mock-ups of her work not be presented under language, implying Kelsey had designed the paper suite. I had not told any of them what to write. That became one of the most satisfying parts of the entire story. Kelsey's portfolio had depended on more people staying quiet than she realized. The wedding looked cohesive because professionals had done their jobs well and collaborated with one another. Kelsey had mistaken that cohesion for something she could simply claim. Once the people behind it began identifying their actual work, her version of the event started shrinking without me having to push. 3 days later, the website changed. I knew because Kelsey texted me first. "I hope you're happy." I took it down. I did not know what "it" meant, so I checked. The homepage of Kelsey Bennett Events had looked different the last time I saw it. There had been a large image from our venue across the top, followed by a section describing romantic glasshouse celebrations, and a preview block for the full-service case study she had planned to complete after our wedding. Now the hero image was gone. The floral section was gone. The stationery detail was gone. The line about full-service wedding design had been replaced by broader language about event styling and day of support. Her portfolio page looked almost empty. What remained were things she had actually done: a backyard wedding, a rehearsal dinner, a bridal shower, a small corporate event, and several table setups photographed in rental studios. None of them were terrible. In fact, a few were good. That was the part Kelsey could never understand when I told her I wanted her to succeed. She had real work. It just did not look as impressive as the version she wanted to sell. She had tried to solve that gap by pretending the gap did not exist. I stared at the website for less than a minute before closing it. Evan was working at the dining table nearby. How bad? For her? Yeah, bad enough. Everything gone? No. The real work is still there. He looked at me. And how does that feel? I thought about it. Fair. That was the answer. Not exciting. Not triumphant. Fair. Kelsey had wanted to skip the part where clients looked at her actual experience and decided whether it was enough. Now they could see exactly what she had done and make that decision themselves. Rebecca made hers the following week. She emailed me once more before contacting Kelsey. She thanked me for answering her questions and said she had also spoken with Elena and another vendor. She did not ask me for more evidence. She did not want the recording or the private email chain. She had enough. 2 days later, Kelsey called. I almost did not answer. Then I remembered the rule I had set for myself. I was not hiding. I was simply not rescuing her. What happened? I asked. You know what happened. No, I don't. Rebecca isn't hiring me. I sat back in my chair. I'm sorry. Don't. I'm not being sarcastic. That makes it worse. I let that pass. Kelsey continued. She said she doesn't feel comfortable hiring me for full-service design because I can't verify the level of experience in the proposal. That sounds like her decision. You helped her make it. I answered questions she asked me. You could have said nothing. Yes. The silence stretched. That was the real conflict now. Not whether I had lied. Whether I had refused to participate in Kelsey's lie. She was going to pay me almost $12,000, Kelsey said. I had not known the amount. It did not change anything. That would have been a big contract. It would have changed everything. Then you should have been able to support the claims you made to get it. You really don't care. I care that you lost an opportunity. I don't think the solution was for me to mislead her. You could have told her I was capable. I don't know whether you're capable of managing her wedding. You know me. That is exactly why I'm not going to be your professional reference for work I've never seen you do. She breathed out sharply. This is what I mean. You always need proof for everything. I needed proof because your deck already made claims that weren't true. That deck is gone. Good. You say that like you won. No, I say it because now your business can be based on work you actually did. You think I should start over. I think you should start from where you really are. She hung up on me. I expected Mom's call within minutes. It took until that evening. She did not call. She emailed. The subject line was enough. I almost deleted it without reading, but I knew better by then. I opened it. The first paragraph accused me of refusing to see the difference between helping family and deceiving people. The second said Kelsey had spent a year building something from nothing, and that one mistake should not define her. The third was mostly about how embarrassed Mom felt that vendors had become involved in a private family matter. Then came the sentence that made me stop. We only needed those pictures long enough to get Kelsey started. I read it again. Not Kelsey misunderstood the plan. Not I thought you agreed. Not the footage was for family. We only needed those pictures long enough to get Kelsey started. It was the entire justification in one sentence. Mom had not believed the work belonged to Kelsey. She had believed the lie only needed to survive until Kelsey became successful enough that nobody would care where the first credibility came from. The rest of the email became less important after that. She wrote that I had torn everything down over technicalities. She said Rebecca would never know how talented Kelsey could have been because I had forced her to judge a new business by an incomplete record. She said Elena and the other vendors had overreacted. I did not respond. I saved the email. Then I added it to the folder. Evan read the sentence over my shoulder and shook his head. That's pretty direct. She doesn't think it's an admission. No, she thinks it proves she was helping. That's the scary part. I knew what he meant. Mom had stopped denying the behavior because, in her mind, the motive purified it. Kelsey needed a start. Therefore, the method became secondary. That logic explained far more of my childhood than I wanted to admit. The next 2 weeks were not dramatic. There was no sudden collapse of Kelsey Bennett events, no flood of cancellations, no viral exposure. Her business simply became smaller and more honest because the inflated parts had been removed. One prospect asked for examples of events Kelsey had actually planned, from beginning to end. She had only one wedding that fit, and it was much smaller than the kind of work she had been pitching. Another client kept her for day of coordination, but hired a separate designer. A local planner she had previously considered beneath her offered occasional assistant work during large weddings. I heard through a cousin that Kelsey initially refused, then called back 3 days later and accepted several dates. That consequence was harsher than anything I could have invented. She had wanted to leap directly into the part of the industry where clients trusted her with complex events. Instead, she had to stand beside people with more experience and learn the parts she had tried to skip. I did not celebrate it, but I did not intervene. Mom started telling relatives a different story. I learned about it from Aunt Linda, who called me one afternoon and asked, "Did you really report Kelsey to all her vendors?" "No, that's what your mother made it sound like." I contacted the vendors who worked my wedding to verify what Kelsey actually did. They made their own decisions after they saw how their work was being described. Linda was quiet. Then she asked, "Was all this really because she held your bouquet?" "No." I almost laughed at how perfectly Mom had reduced the story. I told Linda the minimum. Kelsey asked to use my wedding for her portfolio. I said no. Mom and Dad planned to get the photos anyway. There was already a client deck saying Kelsey designed the wedding. That's what this is about. Linda did not immediately take my side. I respected her more for that. She asked questions. Did Kelsey know I had refused? Yes. Did Dad know about the plan? Yes. Had Kelsey already shown the deck to clients? Yes. I did not send Linda the documents. Not then. I was not interested in recruiting relatives. But I could hear something change in her voice when the story stopped being about flowers. Mom's narrative depended on keeping everything abstract. Claire overreacted. The family made a mistake. Kelsey just needed some pictures. Once people began asking exactly what happened, the story became harder to compress. Dad called me on a Thursday evening. He had been quieter than Mom and Kelsey since the confrontation at my house. That usually meant he was waiting for things to cool down enough that he could step in as the reasonable one. "Your mother wants everyone together Sunday." I was standing at the kitchen sink washing a glass. "For what?" "To settle this." "What needs settling?" "Claire, I'm asking seriously." He sighed. "This has spread to relatives. Kelsey's work has been affected. Your mother is upset. Nobody is talking to each other normally." That sounds like consequences, not unfinished business. Do you want this family permanently divided? There it was. The old pressure. Not what did we do. Not how do we repair it. Do you want to be responsible for what happens if you refuse to make things comfortable again? I dried the glass slowly. Who's coming? Your mother. Kelsey? Aunt Linda. A couple of others. So this is an intervention. No. It sounds like one. It's lunch. I almost smiled. Dad could turn an ambush into lunch with one noun. What does Mom want from me? She wants everybody to stop attacking each other. I haven't attacked anyone. She wants you to acknowledge that mistakes were made on both sides. I went still. What mistake did I make? That's exactly the kind of attitude that makes this difficult. No, Dad. Tell me. What did I do? He hesitated. You embarrassed your sister. How? By involving clients and vendors. They contacted me, or were already involved because it was their work. You could have handled it privately. I tried. Kelsey kept using the work professionally. He was silent. Then he said, "This is why we need to sit down." I knew what Sunday was supposed to accomplish. Mom wanted the phrase both sides in the family record. If I accepted even a vague version of shared blame, she could rebuild the story from there. Kelsey lied about a portfolio, but Claire went too far. Mom made a bad decision, but Claire embarrassed the family. Dad knew about the bouquet, but he was only trying to keep everyone calm. The facts would dissolve back into balance. For the first time, that prospect did not exhaust me. It clarified things. I'll come, I said. Dad sounded relieved. Good, but I'm not agreeing in advance that both sides did anything. His relief vanished. Claire, don't come looking for a fight. I'm not. Then what are you coming for? I looked across the kitchen toward the laptop where the folder was stored. The recording. My January no. Jenna's brief. The forwarded email. The vendor confirmations. Mom's latest admission. I'm coming because if everyone wants to talk about what happened, we're going to talk about what actually happened. Dad was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, Your mother isn't going to like that. For most of my life, that sentence would have sounded like a warning. This time it sounded like information. That's okay, I said. She'll get over it. By Friday morning, I understood that Mom had stopped trying to change the facts and started trying to change what the facts meant. That was a more familiar strategy for her. Facts could be inconvenient. Meaning was flexible. If she could not deny that I had said no, that Kelsey had used my wedding in a client deck, that Dad knew about the bouquet plan, or that vendors had corrected the record, then she could still recast the entire thing as a family dispute that had gotten out of control because everyone was emotional. Once the story became everyone made mistakes, the details would blur. Mom had always been good at that kind of blur. The first text came from a cousin I barely spoke to outside holidays. Your mom says things got really ugly after the wedding. Hope you and Kelsey can work it out. I read it once and put my phone down. An hour later, another relative wrote, Family is more important than business credit. You both probably need to let some things go. That one irritated me enough that I almost answered immediately. Instead, I asked myself what I would actually be correcting. The person had clearly heard a version where Kelsey and I were fighting over recognition. If I sent a long explanation, Mom could tell everyone I was circulating private family documents to win sympathy. I did not want to recruit people. I wanted the truth to remain available when somebody genuinely asked for it. So I replied only, this wasn't a disagreement over credit. Kelsey used my wedding as a full-service design case study after I had already refused permission. Mom and Dad helped her get the images anyway. I'm not asking anyone to take sides. Then I stopped. That became my rule with relatives. I would correct false claims once. I would not campaign. Mom, apparently, had no such rule. Aunt Linda called that afternoon and told me Marilyn had said I was going through Kelsey's business piece by piece because I was angry about what happened with the flowers. Linda did not accuse me. She sounded tired. She told you I'm contacting clients? She implied it. I answered one client who contacted Elena first, and then asked to speak to me. That's what you told me before. It's still what happened. Linda sighed. She keeps saying you could have handled this privately. I did handle it privately until the false work was being used professionally. She says Kelsey already took everything down. She did after the people whose work it was told her the claims were inaccurate. There was a pause. Your mother thinks you want Kelsey punished. I looked at the folder on my laptop. I want Kelsey to stop benefiting from work she didn't do. If that feels like punishment, that's because the benefit mattered. Linda was quiet again. I knew what she was doing. She was comparing two versions of the family she had known for decades. Mom's version had the advantage of familiarity. I was the capable daughter who did not need much. Kelsey was the emotional one, who sometimes made bad decisions but meant well. Dad tried to keep peace. Mom stepped in when everybody else refused to compromise. That story had been repeated so often that nobody needed to consciously believe it anymore. It had become background. I was not going to replace it with a new family myth where I had always been right and everyone else had always been cruel. That would have been just as dishonest. Instead, I said, "Come Sunday and listen. If you think I'm wrong after that, tell me." I was already invited. I know. Your mother called it a family reset. I nearly smiled. Dad called it lunch. Linda laughed once, but there was no humor in it. That sounds like him. After we hung up, I opened a blank document and started writing the timeline. I did not write adjectives. No deceptive. No manipulative. No stolen. Just events. January. Kelsey asks for portfolio photographs from my wedding. I say no in writing. February. Mom and Dad pressure me to reconsider. I repeat no. March. Mom hires Jenna for family social content. She sends Jenna a storyboard and a forwarded email thread describing Kelsey's portfolio needs. Before the wedding, Kelsey uses a client preview deck presenting my wedding as full-service design and styling by Kelsey Bennett Events. Wedding day. Elena's work video captures Mom and Dad discussing the bouquet plan before the reception. Reception. Mom takes bouquet. Kelsey accepts it. Elena plays the recording. Jenna reveals she had been assigned a portfolio shot list. After wedding, vendors confirm Kelsey had no design or coordination role. Prospective client independently verifies Kelsey's claims and chooses not to hire her for full-service work. Kelsey removes the false case study. Mom emails. We only needed those pictures long enough to get Kelsey started. I printed the page and read it from beginning to end. There was nothing dramatic about it. That was exactly why it worked. Evan came into the room while I was making a second copy. What's that? The version without anybody's feelings. He took the page and read it. You're bringing this Sunday? Yes. Along with the emails? Yes. He set the paper down. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you still trying to make sure your mom doesn't feel attacked? I looked at him. I'm not. You are. How? You've spent 10 minutes deciding which documents look less confrontational. That's because I don't want this to turn into theater. I get that. But you also just moved the recording transcript to the bottom because you said it might make her defensive too early. I stared at the papers. He was right. I had not even noticed myself doing it. I'm trying to keep the conversation productive. Productive for who? For everyone. What does that mean? I leaned back in the chair. It means if I walk in there and dump everything on the table like I'm prosecuting them, Mom shuts down, Dad starts talking about tone, Kelsey cries, and nobody gets anywhere. And if you arrange the truth carefully enough, they might have to deal with it. Evan nodded. Maybe. But you're still managing how they experience being confronted with what they did. I disliked that sentence because I knew immediately that it was true. He continued before I could defend myself. I'm not saying go in swinging. I'm saying you don't have to make accuracy comfortable. That sat with me. At work, I chose language carefully because people in pain heard things differently. I knew how to deliver bad information without stripping dignity from the person receiving it. There was value in that skill. But my family had benefited from another version of the same instinct. I had spent years translating reality into language they could tolerate. Mom did not favor Kelsey. Kelsey needed more support. Dad did not enable Mom. He wanted peace. Kelsey did not take advantage. She was struggling. I did not get less. I needed less. Maybe I had become so skilled at making unfairness sound manageable that nobody had been forced to hear what it actually was. I rearranged the papers. Not for maximum impact, for chronology. "What are you doing?" Evan asked. "Stopping myself from editing the facts for their comfort." He smiled slightly. "That sounds expensive." "It probably is." The doorbell rang before I could answer. This time, Kelsey came alone. She looked different from the night she had come with Mom and Dad. Tired, mostly. Her makeup was minimal, her hair tied back, and she did not walk into the house like she was arriving for an argument. "Can I talk to you?" I stepped aside. Evan asked if I wanted him to stay. "I'm okay." He went upstairs. Kelsey sat at the kitchen table and noticed the printed timeline immediately. "What's that?" "Notes for Sunday." She closed her eyes. "Claire, what? Do we really have to do this?" "You mean Sunday?" "All of it." I sat across from her. "What are you asking?" She looked at the papers but did not touch them. "I fixed the website." "Yes. I'm not using the wedding." "Good." "I lost Rebecca." "I know. I took the assistant work." "I heard." She gave me a tired look. "Of course you did." "I didn't ask." "I know." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I want to make this stop." "What does stopping look like?" "You tell the family it got blown out of proportion." "No?" Her expression tightened, but she did not leave. "Can you at least say it was a misunderstanding?" "No." "I'm not asking you to say I did nothing wrong." "You knew I said no." "I know." "Mom knew." "Yes." "Dad knew enough to help." "Yes." "So what part was misunderstood?" She rubbed her palms together. "The scale of it." "What does that mean?" "I didn't think it was going to become a whole family scandal." "That's consequence, not misunderstanding." She looked frustrated. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Make me define every word. When the word changes what happened, yes." She leaned back and stared toward the window. "Fine. Then don't call it a misunderstanding. Say I made a bad decision and you reacted strongly." I almost smiled. "That's just another version." "Of what?" "Shared blame. I'm not saying you're equally responsible." "You want me to say my reaction is part of the problem?" "It is part of why this got so big." "No. Your decision is why I had something to react to." She looked at me sharply. "So you think none of this is on you?" "I think answering a client truthfully is on me. I chose to do it. I stand by it." "You knew she might walk." "Yes." "And you did it anyway." "Yes." "That's a choice." "It is." "Then why do you act like you're just some passive observer of consequences?" That was actually a fair question. I thought about it before answering. "I'm not passive. I decided not to protect you from information you created. That is my choice. If you want to criticize that choice, criticize it. But don't call it the same thing as creating the false claim." Kelsey looked down. After a moment, she said, "Can I keep any of the wedding photos?" "For what?" "My personal page. If the photographer's terms allow it and the caption is honest, that's between you and Marcus." "And business?" "No. What if I say I attended and was inspired by it?" "That's true." "What if I use a picture of me near the flowers?" "Ask Marcus, and don't imply you designed them." She stared at me like she had expected something harsher. "I'm not trying to erase you from my wedding, Kelsey. You could have fooled me. I'm trying to stop you from turning attendance into experience." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Mom wants you to apologize Sunday." "I know. She thinks if you apologize for involving the vendors, everybody can move on." "I'm not apologizing for asking the people who did the work to verify who did the work." She's going to push. "I know. She invited Linda because she thinks Linda will tell you to compromise." I figured. "And Uncle Ray?" That surprised me slightly. Ray had always avoided family conflict even more aggressively than Dad. What does she expect him to do? Say family reputation matters. I looked at Kelsey. "Why are you telling me this?" She shrugged. "Because I don't want Sunday to be another ambush." The word sat between us. It was the first time Kelsey had described something Mom planned in a way that did not automatically defend her. "Thank you." She nodded. I did not mistake it for redemption, but I noticed it. Before she left, she stopped at the door. "If I apologize Sunday, will you tell everyone it's over?" "If you mean will I stop correcting false stories, no." Her face fell slightly. If you mean, will I stop bringing it up once everyone stops lying about it? Yes. That sounds like a contract. Maybe our family needed more of those. She almost smiled. Then she left. Dad called the next evening. I nearly did not answer, because I knew what the conversation would be. He surprised me by starting with, "Kelsey told me she came over." She did. She says you two had a decent conversation. We had a direct conversation. That's good. It was. He paused. Your mother is nervous about Sunday. Why? You know why? No. Tell me. He sighed. She thinks you're bringing documents. I am, Claire. What? Do you really need to put everything in front of people? If people are being asked to decide what happened, yes. No one is deciding anything. Then why are Linda and Ray coming? To help. Help with what? He was silent. I waited. Finally, he said, Your mother feels like everyone has turned against her. That isn't what I asked. You know what I mean. I do. I'm asking you to say it. His frustration came through the phone. Why does everything have to be so exact with you now? Because Vague had been very profitable for everyone except me. I did not say that. Instead, I asked, What does Mom want from Sunday? She wants the family back. That isn't an action. She wants you and Kelsey to stop fighting. We are not currently fighting. She wants you to acknowledge that airing everything with vendors made this worse. There it is. Claire. No, that's the point. She wants me to accept part of the blame for the consequences. She wants you to acknowledge your choices affected people. I already do. Then say that. I will. I chose to answer truthfully. I chose not to help Kelsey keep false claims in her portfolio. I chose to let vendors decide what to do with their own work. That isn't what your mother means. I know. Dad was quiet. Then he said, Do you really want to lose your whole family over this? The question was so familiar that I almost answered automatically. Instead, I let it sit. Who is asking me to leave the family? No one. Who am I asking to leave? No one. Then why would I lose the family? Because people get tired of conflict. Then maybe they should talk to the people who created it. That's not how families work. Maybe that's how ours stopped working. He exhaled slowly. I just want peace. I looked at the printed timeline beside me. No, Dad, you want the discomfort to stop. What's the difference? Peace means the problem is resolved. What you want is for the person most willing to carry the discomfort to carry it again. He did not answer. I continued more quietly. I'm done doing that. He sounded tired when he finally spoke. Your mother isn't going to respond well if you come in accusing her. I'm not planning to accuse her of anything she didn't do. That's not reassuring. It should be. We ended the call without resolving anything. On Sunday morning, I put the printed chronology. My January text exchange with Kelsey. Jenna's brief and usage terms. The relevant forwarded email pages. The vendor confirmations. Mom's angry email, and a transcript of the recording into a plain folder. I left the laptop at home. I did not need a presentation. I did not need slides. I did not want anyone pretending the form of the evidence was more aggressive than the evidence itself. Evan stood by the front door while I put on my coat. You want me there? Yes. You want me talking? Only if someone brings you into it. Done. He opened the door for me. Before I stepped outside, he asked, What happens if they still want an apology? I looked at the folder in my hand. For once, I did not feel anxious about whether I could make them understand. Understanding was their responsibility. If they want me to apologize, I said, they're going to have to tell me exactly what I did. Then I walked out to the car, knowing Mom had invited a room full of people to help soften the truth. She had no idea I had stopped softening it. Mom had chosen a private room at a restaurant she liked because she said neutral ground would help everyone behave like adults. The moment Evan and I walked in, I knew neutral ground had never been the point. Aunt Linda was already there. Uncle Ray sat beside Dad, looking like a man who had accepted an invitation before asking enough questions. Kelsey was at the far end of the table with a glass of water between her hands. Mom had placed herself in the center, where she could see everyone. There were menus at each seat, coffee already poured, and the atmosphere of a meeting disguised as brunch. I put my folder beside my plate and sat down. Mom looked at it immediately. I was hoping we could talk without paperwork. I was hoping we could talk without changing what happened. Dad gave me a warning look. Claire, I opened my menu. I'm not starting anything. Mom waited until the server took our orders before she began. That was another habit of hers. She liked witnesses nearby enough to encourage good behavior, but not close enough to hear the details. Once the door closed again, she folded her hands on the table. I think we all handled the wedding badly. I looked at her. There it was. Not even 5 minutes. We all? I asked. Mom's shoulders tightened. Yes. Everyone was emotional. What did I do? She blinked. This is exactly what I mean. What did I do badly? Claire, please. I'm asking a simple question. Dad stepped in. Your mother is trying to move forward. I understand. I'm asking what part of moving forward requires me to accept blame for something nobody can name. Aunt Linda looked down at her coffee. Uncle Ray cleared his throat. Maybe we don't need to assign percentages. I'm not asking for percentages. Mom's mouth thinned. You involved vendors. You answered a client in a way you knew would hurt your sister's business. You turned a family mistake into something much bigger. I nodded once. Good. Now we have something specific. Mom stared at me as if she had expected that answer to embarrass me. I did involve vendors, I said, because the portfolio claimed their work. I did answer Rebecca, because she asked whether Kelsey designed my wedding. I told her she did not. I stand by both decisions. Kelsey looked at me but said nothing. Mom leaned forward. You could have handled it privately. I tried to. You could have given Kelsey time to correct it. She corrected it after the people whose work she used told her to. She corrected it after it was already shown to clients. Mom exhaled sharply. You keep repeating the worst possible version. No, I'm repeating the sequence. Dad rubbed the bridge of his nose. This is why documents were unnecessary. I opened the folder. No. This is why they're necessary. Mom pushed back slightly in her chair. You are not turning this lunch into a trial. I'm not. I took out 1 page. This is the text where Kelsey asked to use my wedding for portfolio pictures. I placed it on the table. Kelsey's face tightened. I placed the next page beside it. This is my answer. Aunt Linda leaned forward enough to read. You can come as my sister. My wedding isn't a styled shoot for your business. Uncle Ray read it too. Mom said, We know you said no. Good. I placed Jenna's booking brief beside the text. This was sent after I said no. Dad shifted in his chair. I pointed to the relevant lines. Kelsey by the floral installation. Kelsey by the cake. Kelsey adjusting tables. Kelsey with the bridal bouquet. Clean shots without the bride in selected portfolio clips. Mom said, That document makes it sound worse than it was. I looked at her. You sent it. She stopped. I took out the transcript of Elena's raw video. This happened before the reception. Dad's expression changed. I did not play the recording. Everyone at the table had either heard about it or heard it at the wedding except Ray, and I was not interested in recreating the humiliation for effect. I simply passed the transcript toward him. He read Mom's line first. Once she has it, don't let the bride take it back. Then Dad's. And if Claire gets angry? Then Mom's answer. She won't ruin her own wedding over a bouquet. Then Dad's. She'll get over it. Ray lowered the page slowly. Dad said, I've already admitted I knew about the picture. No, you admitted you knew after the recording made denying it impossible. Claire, I'm not insulting you. That is what happened. His voice hardened. I was trying to keep the situation from becoming a scene. You helped create the situation. I did not plan the portfolio. But you knew Mom intended to take something from me after I had said no. It was a bouquet. No, it was my answer. That was the first time the room went completely quiet. Dad stared at me. I continued. You keep calling yourself the person who wanted peace. But you weren't neutral. You decided Mom and Kelsey were allowed to create the conflict because you believed I was the person most likely to absorb it. That is not fair. It's on the recording. I said you'd get over it. Exactly. He opened his mouth. I did not raise my voice. You never kept the peace, Dad. You chose who was allowed to disturb it. He looked away. That hurt more than if he had argued. Mom immediately stepped in. Fine. George should not have said that. I should not have taken the bouquet. Kelsey should not have used the deck. There, we have all acknowledged mistakes. I looked at her. What mistake did I acknowledge? Her face flushed. You are impossible. No, I'm refusing a sentence that is not true. Kelsey finally spoke. Mom, stop saying all of us. Mom turned toward her. Excuse me? I told you this already. Claire didn't make the deck. Mom stared. Kelsey's fingers tightened around her water glass. She didn't tell you to hire Jenna. She didn't make Dad go along with the bouquet thing. She didn't make me send the deck. That doesn't mean her reaction was appropriate. Kelsey looked exhausted. Maybe not everything needs to be balanced. That hit Mom harder than anything I had said. For a second, I saw the family structure wobble. Mom had expected resistance from me. She had not expected Kelsey to refuse protection. I took out the next pages. This is the client preview deck. I did not pass around every slide. Just the cover and the page assigning creative direction, full-service wedding design, and styling Kelsey Bennett events. Aunt Linda read it, then looked at Kelsey. Did you design the wedding? No. Any of it? Kelsey hesitated. No. Linda asked. Then why does this say you did? Mom answered before Kelsey could. Because she needed material that represented the level she was trying to move into. Linda turned toward her. That isn't what I asked. I almost looked at Evan. Mom had spent decades teaching us that specificity was rude. Now everyone was using it. Kelsey said quietly. I made the deck because I needed a stronger case study. Did Claire know? No. Did you know she wouldn't agree? Kelsey looked at me. Yes. Linda sat back. I took out the forwarded email. This is why we know that. I slid the page across the table. Mom's face changed the moment she recognized it. You do not need to share private emails. You forwarded it to Jenna. I did not intend for it to become family evidence. You intended it to become vendor instructions. Ray read over Linda's shoulder. The words sat there without my help. If I can get clean shots without Claire in them, I can finally make the event look like one of mine. Then Mom's reply. Will Claire agree to that? Kelsey's answer. Probably not. Then, but once everything's set up, what is she really going to do? Ray stopped reading. He looked at Kelsey. You knew she said no. Yes. And the plan was to do it anyway. Kelsey's face had gone pale. Yes. No one said anything for several seconds. Mom finally spoke. She needed one opportunity. Linda looked at her. That's your defense? It is not a defense. It is context. Context for what? For why I helped her. You helped her use Claire's wedding after Claire said no. I helped my daughter. Linda's expression changed. You have 2 daughters. Mom went still. I had not expected Linda to say it. Neither had Mom. That is not fair, she said. Linda leaned back. Then explain it. Mom looked around the table as if someone should rescue her. Dad did not. Kelsey did not. Ray certainly did not. Mom turned to me instead. You already had everything. The words came out harder than I think she intended. I did not answer immediately. She continued. You had a career. You had a house. You had Evan. You were paying for this beautiful wedding without needing help from anyone. Kelsey was trying to build something from the ground up. I felt a strange calm settle over me. There it was, the thing beneath every smaller argument. So that made my wedding available? That is not what I said. What did you say? I said you had more. More what? Stability. And? Confidence. And? Mom's eyes filled. But I did not look away. You were always stronger. Kelsey closed her eyes. Dad stared at the table. Mom kept going because once the sentence started, she could not put it back. You always handled things. Even when you were young. If something went wrong, you adjusted. Kelsey didn't. She needed us more. Nobody moved. I asked. So being strong meant I deserved less. Mom shook her head. That is not what I mean. It's exactly what you mean. No. I mean we had to meet different needs. Kelsey needed parents. Mom flinched. I leaned forward slightly. You decided she needed my share too. Her face crumpled for half a second, before anger pulled it back together. That is cruel. No. It's the first time I've said it without making it easier for you. Linda looked at Mom. How many times have you done this? Mom turned sharply. Done what? Taken something from Claire because you decided Kelsey needed it more. Linda, don't. I'm asking. There is nothing to ask. I did not interrupt. That mattered. I did not want to become the person listing 20 years of grievances while everyone watched. If the pattern existed, other people could recognize it without me turning every memory into evidence. Linda did. What about that fundraiser Claire organized? Mom frowned. What fundraiser? The hospital benefit. You told everyone both girls put it together. That was years ago. Kelsey picked decorations, I said quietly. Linda looked at me. I did everything else. Mom snapped. And did that hurt you? The question came out so naturally that she did not realize what she had just proved. I almost smiled. No, I said, that's the point. Mom stared at me. It didn't destroy me, so you decided it didn't count. Dad shifted in his seat. Ray said softly, Marilyn. She ignored him. I was trying to make sure both my daughters felt successful. No, I said. You were trying to make sure Kelsey never had to feel behind. Kelsey flinched. I looked at her, and that did not help you. For the first time, Mom had no quick answer. The server knocked and entered with food. We all sat back as plates were placed in front of us. It was almost absurd. Eggs, coffee, toast, a family structure cracking open between orders. No one touched the food until the server left. Then Dad spoke. I should have stopped it. Mom looked at him. He did not look back. I knew Claire had said no. His voice was quiet. I told myself it was a picture and it wasn't worth a fight. I asked. Worth a fight with who? He looked at me. Your mother. That answer hurt, but it was honest. So you let the fight become mine? Yes. Mom said. George. He raised one hand. I'm not blaming you for my choice. That might have been the first truly accountable sentence I had ever heard him say. It did not fix anything. But I noticed it. Mom pushed her plate away. So what now? Is everyone satisfied? Do I lose my family because I tried too hard to help my younger daughter? I closed the folder. No one is taking your family away. You already have. No, you're experiencing what happens when people stop letting you define every disagreement for them. She stared at me. I stood. Evan stood with me. Mom said, You're leaving? Yes. We haven't resolved anything. We resolved the part I came for. What part? I looked at her. You said why you did it? Her face tightened. I said Kelsey needed us. Yes. That does not make me a monster. I didn't call you one. You're letting everyone think I am. No. I'm letting them think for themselves. I picked up my folder. Kelsey did not ask me to stay. Dad looked like he wanted to say something but did not know what words were his yet, and what words he had spent years borrowing from Mom. As Evan and I reached the door, Linda called my name. I turned. She said, You didn't owe anyone your wedding because you were doing better. Mom looked away. That was the first time someone in my family had said it without adding a qualification. I nodded. Thank you. Then I left. In the parking lot, Evan waited until we reached the car before asking, You okay? I looked back at the restaurant windows. I don't know. That was the truth. I felt lighter and worse at the same time. The mystery was over. There was no hidden financial crisis. No secret legal scheme. No complicated explanation that would somehow make the bouquet make sense. The answer was simpler. My mother believed Kelsey needed more. My father believed I could survive with less. My sister believed my anger would pass before the benefit did. And for years, all three of them had been right about one thing. I usually moved on. My phone buzzed before I opened the car door. A message from Mom. I hope you're happy. Your sister has nothing now. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I typed the only answer that still felt true. She has what she actually built. I sent it, put the phone away, and got into the car. By the third week after the brunch, the consequences had stopped feeling like fallout and started looking like a new normal. Kelsey Bennett events still existed. That mattered because I never wanted the story to become some fantasy where one email from me destroyed an entire business overnight. Kelsey still had clients. She still had taste. She still had enough skill to be useful at an event. What she no longer had was the version of herself she had tried to sell before she had earned it. The glasshouse wedding disappeared from her website. The language about full-service design became smaller and more careful. The portfolio page that had once made her look like someone managing large, polished weddings now showed exactly what she had actually done. A backyard ceremony, 2 showers, a rehearsal dinner, some styled tables, a corporate party, and smaller coordination jobs. Nothing about it was shameful. It simply told the truth about where she was. Through a cousin, I heard that one local planner offered Kelsey assistant work on several larger weddings. The planner was experienced, busy, and apparently willing to teach if Kelsey was willing to listen. Kelsey refused the first time because she thought assistant work would make her look like she was going backward. 3 days later, she called the woman back and accepted. I did not know what Mom said to her during those 3 days. I did not ask. By then, I was beginning to understand that not every consequence needed my attention just because it involved my family. Kelsey also kept 1 day of coordination clients she had already booked. The couple hired a separate designer rather than giving Kelsey the full scope she had originally pitched. Another inquiry asked for references from weddings Kelsey had personally managed from planning through execution. She could provide one. It was a small wedding, but it was real. The client did not book her. I heard that too, indirectly, and once again did nothing. There was a strange satisfaction in watching Kelsey's career become more modest rather than disappear. She had spent so much energy trying to look established that she had skipped the harder question of whether she was ready to be trusted with someone else's expensive, emotionally important day. Now, she had no choice but to gain the experience honestly. She had wanted to leap over the years of carrying boxes, fixing timelines, handling vendor delays, calming bridesmaids, calculating setup windows, and making decisions when something went wrong. Instead, she found herself standing beside people who had already done those things hundreds of times. That was the consequence she had actually earned. Mom thought it was humiliation. She called it that more than once to relatives. I found out because people began asking me directly instead of accepting her version automatically. That change was subtle at first. Aunt Linda called to ask whether Kelsey had truly been forced to close her business. I told her no. Kelsey had not closed anything. She had taken down material that misrepresented her experience and was still working. A cousin asked whether Elena had threatened legal action over the flowers. No. Elena had corrected how her work was described and protected her own commercial rights. Uncle Ray asked whether I had contacted every person Kelsey had ever pitched. Also no. Each question showed me another version of the story Mom had been telling. Claire destroyed Kelsey's company. Claire got vendors to gang up on her sister. Claire turned one bad wedding moment into a campaign. Claire wanted everyone to know. Every version had the same purpose. If Mom could make my response large enough, her original decision could become small by comparison. I answered the facts and stopped. I never sent anyone the full evidence folder unless there was a genuine reason. I never uploaded Elena's recording. I never posted screenshots. I never wrote a long statement about favoritism. I could have. By then, enough wedding guests had heard the recording that a public version of the story would have spread quickly. One cousin even told me, "If you put that clip online, people would tear them apart." "I know," I said. "So why don't you?" "Because I don't need strangers to punish them." She looked disappointed, which almost amused me. The truth was that revenge had become less interesting once the truth no longer needed my help to survive. The people who had to know already knew. Vendors knew who had done the work. Kelsey's prospects could ask for real references. Relatives had enough information to decide whether Mom's explanation made sense. I did not need 10,000 comments from people who had never met us telling me I was right. I needed my family to stop expecting me to lie because the truth was inconvenient. Mom struggled with that more than anyone. She had spent years being the person relatives called when they wanted to know what was happening in our family. She remembered birthdays, organized holiday meals, coordinated visits, knew which cousin was fighting with which aunt, and usually offered the first explanation when something went wrong. That gave her a kind of authority nobody had formally granted her. After the wedding, that authority began to weaken. If Mom said Kelsey's business had been ruined, Linda called me. If Mom said Dad had been dragged into the bouquet plan without understanding it, Ray asked Dad directly. If Mom said I refused to speak to anyone, people discovered quickly that I answered their calls. Nobody banished her from the family. Nobody stopped inviting her to everything. The shift was much smaller than that and, for Mom, probably much worse. People started verifying. The first time I really noticed it was at a family birthday dinner about 2 months after the wedding. I almost skipped it, then decided I did not want to surrender every family space just because Mom would be there. Evan came with me. Kelsey arrived late from an event and looked exhausted. Dad was already seated. Mom spent the first half hour being aggressively normal. Then someone asked Kelsey how business was going. Before Kelsey could answer, Mom said, "It would be going much better if some people hadn't decided to interfere." A year earlier, that sentence would have ended the subject. Nobody would have wanted to invite tension. This time, Linda said, "Didn't she just have to remove the wedding she didn't design?" Mom stared at her. Kelsey looked down at her plate. Linda continued, "I'm asking because those are two different things." The table went quiet. I said nothing. That was the moment Mom looked at me. Not angry exactly, almost betrayed. As if my refusal to rescue her from Linda's question was another thing I had done to her. Kelsey finally said, "I'm doing coordination work now." Linda nodded. "How is it?" Kelsey shrugged. "Hard." Then she added, "Useful." Mom did not speak again for several minutes. I went home that night understanding something I had missed before. Mom had not lost the family. She had lost the ability to decide what the family believed before anyone else spoke. For someone who had spent decades controlling conflict through interpretation, that was a real consequence. Dad's consequence looked different. He continued trying to act as the communication bridge long after I stopped allowing it. The first time was 4 days after the brunch. "Your mother wants to know if you're coming for dinner Sunday. Then Mom can ask me." There was a pause. "I'm asking for her." "I know. She doesn't want another argument. Then she can send a text asking whether I'm coming to dinner." Dad sounded irritated. "Why does it matter who asks?" "Because I'm not discussing Mom through you anymore. I'm not asking you to discuss her. You're carrying her request. That's what families do." "No, that's what you do." He went quiet. I declined dinner. A week later, he called again. "Kelsey needs the contact information for that rental company you used." "Then Kelsey can ask me." "Claire. If she wants something from me, she can ask. She feels awkward." "I understand. So you're going to make her call?" "I'm not making her do anything." He sighed. "You know what I mean." "I do." I did not give him the contact. Kelsey texted me 2 hours later. "Can you send me the rental company you used for the lounge furniture?" I replied with the company name and website. That was it. No punishment. No lecture. No reminder about the wedding. The next time she needed something, she asked me herself. It sounds small because it was small, but it removed Dad from a role he had occupied for most of my adult life. He could no longer call me with requests disguised as family obligations while keeping the person who actually wanted something protected from the discomfort of asking. When Mom wanted something, she had to contact me. When Kelsey needed something, she had to contact me. If they were angry, they had to be angry with me directly. Dad did not get to absorb the message on one side and transfer the pressure to me on the other, then call himself neutral. He hated it. I think at first he experienced the change as me being difficult. Then, slowly, he began noticing how much work he had been doing to protect everyone except the person he was asking to compromise. Kelsey's apology came near the end of July. It arrived by text on a Tuesday evening while Evan and I were making dinner. I've been trying to figure out how to say this without making it worse. I know you told me no. I knew you wouldn't agree to the portfolio thing if I asked again. And I went along with Mom because I wanted the pictures. I shouldn't have used your wedding like it was something I had done. I shouldn't have let Mom take the bouquet either. I'm sorry. I read it once and felt something loosen. Then I reached the last paragraph. I just wish you hadn't had to expose everything the way you did. I feel like I'm going to be paying for one mistake forever. There it was. Not as bad as before, but still there. The small attempt to place part of the consequence back in my hands. I showed the message to Evan. He read it and said, "Better. Yeah. Good enough?" I looked at the phone. I don't know. I did not answer that night. I did not want to punish Kelsey by withholding a response, but I also did not want to reward a partial apology with immediate forgiveness because everyone was tired. The next morning I wrote, "I appreciate you acknowledging what you did. I'm not asking you to pay forever. I'm asking you to stop treating the consequences of the decision as something I did to you." I considered adding more. I did not. She replied a few hours later, "I'm trying." That was the last thing we said about it for a while. I believed her. I also did not confuse trying with finished. Dad came to see me alone in early August. That was unusual enough that I knew something was different before he sat down. He did not bring Mom. He did not say she wanted anything. He did not mention Kelsey. Evan was out running errands, so Dad and I sat on the back patio with iced tea between us. For several minutes, he talked about normal things. Work around the house. Traffic. A neighbor cutting down a tree too close to the property line. Then he put his glass down. "I've been thinking about what you said." "Which part?" "That I never kept the peace." I waited. He rubbed his hands together. "I didn't like hearing it." "I know. I thought it was unfair." I nodded. "And then I started thinking about how many times your mother was upset with you and I called you instead of telling her she was wrong." That was the closest he had ever come to examining the pattern without me leading him toward it. He looked out at the yard. "I kept telling myself you were easier to talk to." I did not answer. He continued, "You were." I almost smiled. "Probably. And somehow I turned that into your responsibility." His voice got quieter. "If Kelsey was falling apart and you were angry, I went to you. If your mother was unreasonable and you were frustrated, I went to you." I kept asking the easier child to absorb the harder one. I felt the sentence more than I expected. Not because it erased anything, because it was specific. For once, Dad had not said everybody made mistakes. He had not said Mom meant well. He had not said I was too sensitive. He had named his own behavior without requiring me to help him make it gentler. "Yes," I said. He waited. I think some part of him expected forgiveness to follow. It did not. I was not trying to punish him. I simply did not have a larger answer yet. After a moment, he nodded. "I'm sorry. I believe you." That was all I could honestly give him. His shoulders dropped slightly. "Is there anything I can do?" "Stop carrying messages." "I have. I noticed. And keep doing that." He nodded. We sat there for another 20 minutes talking about unrelated things. When he left, he hugged me. I hugged him back. That did not restore our relationship to what it had been. I no longer wanted the old relationship. The old relationship required me to believe Dad's passivity meant innocence. Maybe, with time, we could build something more honest than that. By mid-August, 4 months had passed since the wedding. Evan and I had stopped measuring our marriage by the scandal that happened on its first day. We had work, bills, grocery lists, weekends, friends, stupid arguments about where to put things in the kitchen, and 1,000 ordinary pieces of married life that had nothing to do with my parents. One evening, an email from Marcus landed in my inbox. "Final album proof ready." Our digital gallery had been delivered weeks earlier, but I had kept postponing the physical album. Every time I opened the gallery, I found myself looking for evidence instead of memories. Mom reaching for the bouquet. Kelsey's face. Dad standing behind them. Jenna's camera. I hated that those were the images my mind searched for first. Eventually, I had chosen the album photographs anyway. Marcus's email included one final proof link and a note. I added one image near the end that you didn't select. "If you hate it, I'll remove it, but I think you should see it before we send the book to print." I opened the proof. I moved through the ceremony, portraits, dinner, dancing, speeches, friends, and all the moments I had almost allowed my family to reduce to one confrontation. Then I reached the photograph Marcus had added. I had forgotten it existed. It had been taken minutes after I got my bouquet back. The photograph was not dramatic. That was the first thing I noticed when Marcus's album proof opened on my screen. No one in the background was pointing. Nobody looked shocked. There was no visible trace of the silence that had fallen over the reception when Elena played the recording. No frozen expression on my mother's face. No sign of Dad standing a few feet away after telling a room full of people that my bouquet was just flowers. Marcus had taken the picture only a few minutes after I got the bouquet back, but if you did not know what had happened before it, you would never have guessed. I stood near the edge of the dance floor with the flowers tucked against my waist, one hand wrapped around the silk-covered stems, and the other resting against Evan's arm. Elena was blurred at the edge of the frame, laughing at something I could not remember. I was laughing too, not the smile I used when someone pointed a camera at me, not the expression I wore when I was trying to convince relatives that everything was fine. My head was turned away from Marcus, my shoulders were loose, and for one unguarded second, I looked like a woman who had forgotten there was anything in the room she needed to manage. Kelsey was not in the photograph. Mom was not in it. Dad was not in it either. At first, that absence felt so perfectly symbolic that I wondered whether Marcus had chosen the angle on purpose. Then I checked the timestamp and realized the truth was much simpler. They were not in the picture because they were not part of that moment. No one had cropped them out. No one had arranged a photograph to punish them. They had moved back toward their table. Elena had stayed near me. Evan had come to my side, and Marcus had happened to press the shutter. The photograph was not revenge. It was simply accurate. I stared at it longer than I had intended. For months, the bouquet had been the object my mind returned to first whenever I thought about the wedding. I could still remember how Mom's fingers closed around the stems. I remembered the slight pull against my wrist before I understood she was actually taking it from me. I remembered Kelsey holding it against her dress, Dad saying they were just flowers, Elena stepping forward, and my mother lunging toward the phone when her own voice came through the speakers. Even after the flowers dried and I eventually threw away most of them, the bouquet had stayed connected to that scene in my head. I had begun to think of it as the thing my family took. The photograph gave it back to me. The bouquet was in my hands. I was smiling. The wedding had continued. That mattered more than I expected. I wrote Marcus back and told him to keep the photograph exactly where he had placed it in the album proof. Then I closed the laptop because I did not want to spend the evening turning the image into another piece of analysis. I had done enough of that since April. I had examined messages, contracts, emails, timelines, invoices, footage, and memories until I could tell you exactly who had done what and when. That had been necessary. But I was beginning to understand that knowing the facts and living inside them were not the same thing. When the physical album arrived 2 weeks later, Evan brought the box into the dining room and set it on the table like it contained something fragile. I had seen all the photographs digitally by then. Marcus had delivered the gallery about 5 weeks after the wedding. But for a long time I had avoided choosing the final album images because every time I opened the gallery, I found myself searching for evidence instead of memories. I looked for Mom in the background. I checked whether Jenna's camera was visible. I studied Kelsey's expression. I noticed where Dad was standing before the bouquet incident. I turned wedding photographs into exhibits without meaning to. The physical album forced me to move through the day in order. The first pages showed the venue before anyone arrived. The garden was damp from a light rain that had passed that morning. The glass house reflected a pale April sky. Chairs waited in neat rows. Elena's flowers framed the ceremony space without looking overdone. I remembered standing inside earlier that day, worrying for exactly 30 seconds about whether the temperature would drop before the ceremony, then deciding I had no control over Virginia weather and letting it go. That memory made me smile, because it reminded me of the kind of problem I had expected to matter that day. Then came photographs of Evan getting ready with his brother and a few close friends. He looked nervous in a way he had denied being nervous. In one picture, his tie was crooked and his brother was laughing while trying to fix it. In another, Elena was pinning his boutonniere on while Evan turned the wrong direction for the 3rd time. I could almost hear her telling him to stop moving. The next pages were mine. My dress hanging beside the window, my shoes under a chair, my hands resting in my lap while someone finished my hair. a close-up of the earrings I had chosen. Elena bringing in the bouquet before the ceremony and turning it once in her hands so I could see the finished shape. I stopped at that photograph. The bouquet had looked exactly the way I wanted, not because it represented my family, not because it had belonged to someone else, not because it carried a hidden message or heirloom. I had simply liked those flowers. That simplicity had become more important to me after everything happened. I turned the page. There was a picture of me walking toward Evan. I had almost forgotten how happy I looked. That was embarrassing to admit, but it was true. The conflict after the ceremony had grown so large in my memory that for a while it felt like the emotional center of the wedding. Yet Marcus's photographs told a different story. I had laughed before the ceremony. I had cried during the vows. Evan had looked at me as if there were not another person on the property. We had kissed. People had cheered. We had walked back down the aisle together, with no idea that my mother had already discussed how she intended to take something from me later. I touched the edge of the page. "It was a good wedding," I said. Evan looked at me from across the table. "You sound surprised." "I think I let the worst 10 minutes become the whole day." They were a pretty aggressive 10 minutes. I laughed. "That's true." He turned another page. "You also married me." "That happened too. Big moment." "Very." I'm glad the album remembered. That was one of the things I loved about him. He could let something serious stay serious without giving it control over every conversation. He had never told me to forget what my family did. He had never suggested forgiveness because holding boundaries was uncomfortable. But he also refused to let them become the center of our marriage. Life helped with that. Family drama is very good at making itself feel like the most important thing happening. For a few weeks, almost every day seemed connected to Mom, Kelsey, the portfolio, or Dad. Then ordinary life reclaimed the space. Work got busy. Evan's car needed brakes. We assembled patio furniture badly, argued about a bookshelf, forgot groceries, paid bills, saw friends, and spent quiet evenings doing nothing important at all. Those things were not distractions from the real story. They were the real story, too. My marriage did not begin with Mom taking my bouquet. It began with Evan and me choosing each other, and then waking up the next morning still responsible for groceries, schedules, home repairs, and every ordinary decision that makes up a shared life. My family had interrupted one day. They had not defined what came after. I kept turning pages until I reached the photograph Marcus had added. In print, the bouquet looked less perfect than I remembered. One garden rose had bent slightly. A few petals near the edge were bruised where Kelsey had pressed the flowers against her dress. Some greenery had shifted. Elena would have noticed all of it immediately. I had not. I liked that. The bouquet looked like something that had been handled. Something had happened to it. It was still mine. I asked Marcus for an additional print. When it arrived, I framed it and put it on the console table in our living room. Not the formal portrait of Evan and me beneath the floral arch, though I loved that picture. Not the photograph of us cutting the cake. Not one of the carefully posed wedding party shots. I chose the picture nobody had meant to create. The one where I had the bouquet back and was laughing. Mom noticed it the first time she came to our house after the brunch. That visit did not happen quickly. For several weeks after the restaurant, we barely spoke. She sent occasional messages about family logistics. I answered what required an answer, and ignored anything that was really another attempt to reopen the argument under a different name. She never gave me the apology I might have wanted if I had still believed apologies were required for closure. Her language changed, but only slightly. I was trying to help Kelsey. I made a poor judgment call. Things got out of hand. I wish everyone had handled it privately. She never said the sentence that would have mattered most. You told us no. I understood you, and I decided to override you anyway. That distinction kept me from pretending the relationship was repaired simply because time had passed. I did not require Mom to produce a perfect confession before I would ever sit in the same room with her again. I just stopped translating partial accountability into full accountability for her convenience. When she finally asked if she could come over, she did it herself. Dad did not call first. That alone told me something had changed. She had been in the living room for maybe 5 minutes when she saw the photograph on the console table. She stopped. That's a nice one. Yes. She stepped closer. Is that after? She did not finish. Yes. For a moment I wondered if she expected me to explain why I chose it. I could have told her I liked that she was not in the frame. I could have reminded her that the bouquet had been back in my hands only because Elena forced the truth into the room. I could have turned the photograph into a small punishment every time she saw it. I did not. The picture did not need Mom's interpretation. That was part of why I loved it. She looked at it a few seconds longer and then moved on. Our relationship after that became smaller. I do not mean worse. Smaller, clearer. Before the wedding, Mom assumed access to almost every part of my life because she was my mother. If Evan and I were considering a trip, she expected to know. If work was difficult, she expected details. If I had a decision to make, she offered an opinion whether I asked or not. I had spent years confusing availability with closeness. After the wedding, I shared things because I wanted to. If she gave advice I had not requested, sometimes I listened. Sometimes I said, "We've already decided." The first few times, she reacted as if I had rejected her personally. Then she began learning that disappointment was survivable. That realization was almost funny, given how many years she had assumed the same thing about me. The clearest example came in August when she called about a family dinner. "Are you and Evan coming Sunday?" "No. We already have plans." "A Pause." "What plans?" "Dinner with friends." "You could move that." "We're not going to." Another pause. "You used to make more time for us." I knew the invitation hidden inside that sentence. I could defend myself. I could explain that I still saw the family. I could list every dinner I had attended. I could reassure her that I loved her. Instead, I answered the actual issue. I used to rearrange my plans more often. That's what I mean. I know. Why don't you now? I thought for a second. Because having flexibility doesn't mean I always have to be the flexible person. She did not like the answer, but she accepted it. There was no argument. That was progress. Even if neither of us called it that. Kelsey and I changed differently. Her apology had not erased what happened, and I had already made it clear that I would not accept responsibility for the consequences of choices she had made. For a while, we gave each other space. Then, one afternoon, she texted me herself and asked if I wanted coffee. She asked. That detail mattered. No mom arranging it. No dad calling to say Kelsey needed to see me. No family obligation disguised as reconciliation. Just a text. I said yes. When I arrived, she was already at a table near the window, hair pulled back, laptop bag on the chair beside her. She looked tired. "How's work?" I asked. She rolled her eyes. "Humbling." I smiled. "That sounds healthy. Don't enjoy it too much." "I'm trying." She gave me a reluctant laugh. She had continued taking assistant and coordination work with the local planner. At first, I think she treated it as something temporary, a punishment she had to survive until she could return to the level she thought she deserved. But actual work has a way of correcting theory. "I spent 6 hours fixing place cards last Saturday," she said. "Why?" "The client changed 3 tables the night before." "Sounds fun." "It was awful." She took a drink. "Then the florist was late. Very Elena of you to complain about florists now." She was 40 minutes late. "That is different." "And one of the groomsmen disappeared before photos." "Where?" "Bar." "Of course." Kelsey laughed. Then she grew quieter. I thought event design was more of the part people see. I waited. The colors, flowers, tables, photos, that's part of it. "Yeah, it's like 20%. Sometimes less." She stared at her coffee. "The rest is fixing things." "Pretty much. People are exhausting." "Also true." She looked at me. "I get more of it now." "More of what?" "Why you were mad about the portfolio." I let the wording sit. She noticed. She sighed. "Why you were right about the portfolio." That was harder for her. I appreciated it because I knew it was harder. "There's so much work nobody sees," she said. I thought if I knew how I wanted something to look, that was basically the same as knowing how to create the whole event. It isn't. I know. And now I know how much I didn't know. That's usually a useful stage. She smiled. You sound like my planner. She sounds smart. She's terrifying. Even better. For a while we talked about work without discussing the wedding at all. That felt more meaningful than a dramatic reconciliation would have. Kelsey was beginning to describe things accurately. She said, I coordinated check-in. Not, I ran the wedding. She said, I assisted with the setup. Not, I designed the room. She said, the planner let me handle the vendor timeline. Not, I managed the entire event. Those distinctions were small, but I noticed them because language had been part of the original problem. Kelsey had wanted words to move her farther ahead than her experience. Now the words were beginning to match reality. When we left the coffee shop, she hugged me. I hugged her back. Neither of us cried. Nobody declared that we were sisters again. We had never stopped being sisters. We were simply trying to become adults who could be sisters without one of us being required to disappear inside the other's needs. Dad's change showed itself less through another apology than through repetition. After our conversation on the patio, he kept doing the one thing I had asked of him. He stopped carrying messages. When Dad called me now, it was because he wanted to talk to me, not because Mom wanted something or Kelsey needed me to fix something. I still did not consider everything repaired, but for the first time he was building a relationship with me instead of using one to maintain the others. Mom struggled with the new structure more than either of them, not because she lost money. Not because some enormous scandal destroyed her social life. The consequences were quieter. She lost automatic authority. For years, Mom had been the person relatives called when they wanted to know what was happening in our family. She remembered birthdays, organized gatherings, knew who had moved, who was sick, who was angry, who needed help, and what version of every argument should be repeated. After the wedding, people started verifying. If Mom said Kelsey's business had been destroyed, Linda called me. If Mom said Dad had not known about the bouquet plan, Ray asked Dad. If Mom said I refused to speak to anyone, relatives discovered I answered their calls. Nobody banished her. Nobody stopped inviting her to family dinners. Nobody stood up at Christmas and announced that Marilyn Bennett was no longer trustworthy. It was subtler. People stopped assuming the first version they heard was the final version. For Mom, that was probably more painful than public humiliation would have been. By mid-August, 4 months had passed since the wedding. Enough time had gone by that I no longer woke up thinking about the bouquet. Enough time had passed that Kelsey's career had settled into a more realistic shape. Dad had stopped acting as family messenger, and Mom had discovered that my ability to say no was not a temporary wedding reaction. By then, the consequences had settled into the shape they deserved. Kelsey lost the credibility she had tried to claim before earning it, and had to build real experience instead. Mom lost the assumption that her version of a family conflict would automatically become everyone else's version. Dad lost the comfort of standing between people, carrying pressure in one direction, and calling himself neutral. None of them lost everything. They lost the specific advantages that had made the behavior possible. I could have pushed for more damage, but I no longer wanted more. The people who needed the truth had it, and the consequences no longer needed my help. I had my consequence too. I had to stop using my strength as an excuse to abandon myself. That was harder than I expected. I liked being capable. I still like it. I like being able to solve problems. I like knowing I can take care of myself. I like not needing constant reassurance. I like being the person who can walk into a difficult situation, understand what matters, and make a decision. For years, I had attached another belief to those qualities without realizing it. If I could survive something easily, then maybe it was not important enough to confront. If Mom gave Kelsey a contact I found, I could find another. If Kelsey got praised for something I had mostly done, I still knew what I accomplished. If Dad asked me to change plans, I could change them. If Mom forgot a boundary, I could restate it. If I would eventually calm down, why make everyone uncomfortable now? Sometimes that was maturity. Sometimes it was generosity. Sometimes it was just an efficient way to teach people that disrespecting me had no cost. The wedding made the distinction impossible to ignore. Mom taking my bouquet did not break me. Kelsey's portfolio did not ruin my career. Dad's choice did not destroy my marriage. I survived all of it with my life intact. That did not make any of it acceptable. Being capable of surviving disrespect does not create an obligation to accept it. That was what I had misunderstood for years. I had thought boundaries were mostly about speaking clearly. Say no. Explain the limit. Make your position known. But the real test comes afterward. What happens when someone hears no and proceeds anyway? Before April, my answer often depended on whether correcting them seemed worth the energy. After April, my answer became simpler. If the boundary mattered enough to state, ignoring it had to matter too. That did not mean punishment every time. It did not mean cutting people out after one mistake. It meant consequences stopped disappearing just because I was capable of absorbing the damage. One evening near the end of August, I came home before Evan and found the house quiet. The late sunlight crossed the living room and caught the glass over the framed wedding photograph. I stopped in front of it. The bouquet looked almost too large against my dress. One bent rose was visible near the edge. My hand was wrapped around the stems. Elena was blurred in the background. Evan was turned toward me. I was laughing. I thought about the photograph my family had wanted. Kelsey holding the bouquet. Kelsey standing beside the florals. Kelsey framed inside the finished room. Kelsey surrounded by other people's work until a client could look at one polished image and assume she had created everything around her. They had believed photographs could decide what happened. Maybe they were partly right. Not because a photograph could turn a lie into truth, because choosing which image to keep meant choosing which story I allowed to represent the day. I did not frame Mom taking the bouquet. I did not save a print of Elena playing the recording. I did not put Kelsey's portfolio deck beside our wedding album as some trophy of how I exposed her. Those things mattered. They were evidence. They were not the memory I wanted to live inside. I picked up the physical album from the shelf and opened it to the page Marcus had added. The printed photograph looked warmer than the framed copy because of the paper. I ran my fingers lightly along the edge of the page, careful not to touch the image itself. My parents had been right about one thing. I was fine. I had always been the daughter who would be fine. If something went wrong, I adjusted. If someone disappointed me, I kept moving. If life required more from me, I usually found a way to give it. That had never been the problem. The problem was what my family decided my resilience entitled them to do. They had treated my ability to recover like a discount on hurting me. Kelsey needed more. Mom worried more about Kelsey. Dad wanted less conflict. Claire would be fine. For years, that sentence had ended arguments before I even realized an argument was happening. Not anymore. I did not need my parents to choose me over Kelsey. I never had. I did not need Kelsey to fail so I could feel successful. I did not need relatives to decide I had been the good daughter all along. I needed one thing that should never have required a fight. What belonged to me had to stop becoming available simply because somebody else claimed to need it more. My work, my credit, my time, my answer, my wedding, my memories. I closed the album. Across the room, the bouquet was still in my hands. That was the photograph I kept. Not because I had won the flowers back, because by then I finally understood that the real thing I had taken back was the right to decide what happened after I said no. I slid the album onto the shelf, looked once more at the woman laughing in the photograph, and walked toward the kitchen as I heard Evan's car pull into the driveway. For once, being fine did not mean anyone else got away with what they had done. It simply meant I had survived them without surrendering anything else that belonged to me. You do not have to accept disrespect just because you are strong enough to survive it. When someone ignores a clear boundary, protect your work, tell the truth, and let consequences follow. Strength means choosing what you will no longer tolerate. If this story resonated, subscribe for more family stories.